A very good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the second day of the UN Science Policy Business Forum on the Environment, the third global session. My name is Axel Threlfall. I'm editor-at-large for Reuters based out of London, and I am thrilled to be involved in this compelling forum once again. Many thanks to all of you for tuning in. We've got a really exciting afternoon ahead. We had an incredible turnout yesterday and a really excellent and diverse panel on big data, technology and the digital economy, which of course is such an important part of the whole discussion. Today, we rethink cities and how to bring nature back to the urban environment. As it says in the session literature, a transition towards low carbon, resource efficient, nature positive and socially just cities is crucial to advance towards the Sustainable Development Goals and the new urban agenda. Some of these statistics are eye-opening. Close to 66% of the global population, mainly in the global south, are expected to live in cities by 2050. The resource requirements of urban areas could grow to nearly 90 billion tons a year by 2050, with high demand for land, food supplies and raw materials that will far exceed the planet's threshold. Cities are already responsible for some 75% of greenhouse gas emissions, but in and around cities, biodiversity and green areas provide ecosystem benefits and services, increasing, of course, the resilience of cities and improving human health. And we will talk about that to some degree this afternoon as well. Today, we examine the pathways required to make the transition through integrated solutions and the role of various sectors in achieving that. So in this session, we'll endeavor to address several key questions. Let me just run through those. What strategies and innovations are needed to transform cities and the infrastructure that support them to a sustainable path that will lead to a greater efficiency, resilience, and inclusion? Point number one. Number two, what policies, investments, and multi-sector initiatives are required to implement these strategies at scale to achieve the SDGs? And finally, why cross-sectoral infrastructure integration is so essential. So again, we come back to some basic requirements: adequate support from policymakers, adequate support from business, and of course, collaboration. We hear so much about the need for effective collaboration. We hear so much from all stakeholders involved about the desire to collaborate, to find solutions and get things done. The strength of this forum lies in its ability to bring together partners and networks representing all of those stakeholders. So hopefully we can go away with a better understanding of what is at stake here and how solutions can be found if we work together. One final thing, we're also running a quiz today. This is courtesy of Harry Fahar. That's going to be found in the live poll section of the platform. It's a quiz on urban sustainability. I will let Harry tell us more when we hear from him a little bit later on, but that should be quite exciting, and we'll see how everyone gets on with that. Let's get proceedings underway. Let me start by welcoming Martina Otto. Martina is Head of Cities at UN Environment Programme. I'd also like to invite Julie Greenwald, the co-chair of Geo for Cities report, who will help set the scene. Martina, if I could come first to you with a specific question, and that is on the opportunities. And we talk so much about opportunities afforded us by this pandemic, but the opportunities afforded us when it comes to rethinking cities and how this session might help us reconfigure our priorities for action. Go ahead, Martina.
Okay, thank you so much, Axel, and a very warm welcome as well from UNEP side to the session today. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and dear colleagues, to the session. And maybe just before I get into it, a quick one. This session builds on the last City Summit, which was actually the first one that was ever held at a UNEA conference, and where we focused on innovation for integrated urban systems, and did also launch a partnership with private sector companies to help bring technology solutions to scale. And quite a few of them are actually part of this panel as well. So we see a continuation of this. And obviously that links very nicely to a resolution that was passed at the last UNEA, which is on sustainable infrastructure. And just as last time, the outcomes of today will also be captured in an outcome document and be brought back to the Assembly, where the new medium-term strategy for UNEP will be adopted. And I think we can make a real contribution to what is set out in this medium-term strategy as well. So we've chosen to zoom in on rethinking our cities, and Axel highlighted already some of the key figures. And let me add one more to the ones that he mentioned, and that 70% of the 2050s urban infrastructure is yet to be built. And that shows us not only do we have a big challenge, but also we have a huge opportunity to turn things around. And the present COVID-19 pandemic has really demonstrated how much cities are at the forefront of both impact and response. And it has brought to the fore the inequalities and how they increase vulnerability. And the pandemic has also given us a flavor of how much harder we are hit if a crisis hits us unprepared. And that calls for more resilience building. But from the past pandemics, we have also seen that cities have an enormous capacity to reinvent themselves. So, for example, the sewage systems in Paris and London do go back to cholera and tuberculosis outbreaks. So in line with this, I think we have a real opportunity to build back better and greener. And many cities have created, for example, they've reacted. They've created bike lanes, pedestrian zones. They've been reclaiming public spaces. And there has been a rapid adoption of telecommuting as well. And that illustrates how societies can transform seemingly overnight to confront urgent threats. And we just have to make sure that we do take action with the same sense of urgency on climate, nature, and pollution challenges. And why should we bring back nature into the cities linked to that? And I want to highlight three key things and make reference to the descriptor review, the economics of the biodiversity that just came out a couple of days ago, with the key headline messages that our economies, livelihoods, and well-being are all dependent on our most precious asset, nature. We have collectively failed to engage with nature sustainably. And we're exceeding the capacity of nature to supply us with the goods and services that we all rely on. And therefore, we need to change how we think, act, and measure success. So that's the descriptor review with much more behind it. But I wanted to give a few headlines of it.
All right.
The current pandemic, let me just put that further into perspective. The pandemic with the restrictions of movement has painfully reminded us how valuable nature is, and the access to nature in our urban landscapes is for our well-being. And it's been clear that this access is very uneven. So with the city expansion and the pressure on land and real estate prices on the rise, urban nature is often the first to go. But if we would actually measure how much it costs to fill with green infrastructure the gap that is left by green infrastructure, then we would actually have a different sort of number. So for us, it's absolutely critical that we look at bringing back nature in the first place, but also that we look at how the urban sprawl interacts with nature around cities. And here there's a whole movement around the 15-minute city, looking at more self-sufficient neighborhoods, where UNEP has put together guidelines, but which is very much as well at the heart of a project, which is the Sustainable Cities Impact Program that is supported by the Global Environment Facility. And we will hear more about that one as well. And the last is really how we reduce pressure on nature away from cities. And here cities do have a critical role on the way towards circularity. So that's the third point that I want to make. In keeping materials for as long as possible and at the highest value possible in the economic cycle to reduce resource use and the embodied carbon while creating local jobs. And COVID-19 has highlighted the fragility of complex value chains and has therefore given us an additional argument for more local value chains that make use of circularity opportunities. And we will have a lot of opportunity to look into the how-to on all the three aspects. But in a nutshell, in redefining the future of our cities, let's make them better for people and the planet. And with that, back to you, Axel.
All right, Martina, thank you. Well, look, a quick question to you. Of course, I mentioned at the top the importance of involvement from all stakeholders, the policy side, the business side. Just in a nutshell, seeing as we're hearing your headline thoughts now, how much optimism do you feel in terms of stakeholder involvement from the government level, at the business level. How much momentum is building here, would you say?
I think there's a lot of momentum building. We hear, as I pointed out, number one, there's local leadership that has taken very decisive action already. We do see green recovery packages coming online that actually highlight quite a few things that I mentioned already. Is it enough yet? No, not quite yet. And it's also an issue about how much of the funds for the recovery are already getting to that level. And we haven't quite yet seen that coming in, but it's also quite normal because we're all in the midst of the pandemic and dealing with it. But huge momentum.
All right, Martina, thank you very much indeed. Julie Greenwald, let me bring you in here. Julie, you of course co-chaired the Development for the Geo for Cities report. If you could start by outlining for us some of the key pathways to help this transition, the city transition to becoming more circular, more resilient, more resource efficient, more socially inclusive. What are we looking at here, Julie?
Thanks, Axel. And just to say welcome to everyone, join Martina and Axel in welcoming everyone to this session. I think Axel has laid out very well just how much we're going to attempt to cover in this session. And I think it really shows the multitude of the issues that we're facing. And I think we all recognize the enormity and difficulties of these topics, in part as every day seems to bring a new challenge and reminder of just how critical the choices we make and the action that we take in these next few years we have taken are for not only the future, but also the present. I mean, the terrible infrastructure failures in Texas in the past few days. Earlier this year, Istanbul came dangerously close to day zero and running out of water. We never seem to have a lack of examples of why we need to make changes to our business as usual in the cities and what we need to do with our built to natural environment. But the question, of course, remains, how are we going to meet the moment of these compounding crises? What can we do about it? I actually recently saw on Twitter a very clever question. We all know there are only clever and smart things on Twitter, of course. And, you know, this question was posed by the co-founder and co-director of Climate Interactive. And she asked, for those of you who are working in cities, how ready do you feel to put potential stimulus funds towards projects that address climate change, center equity, and build community leadership? I was pleasantly surprised to see how many people responded positively that they do have projects and ideas ready to go. But it was admittedly a very small sample size. And I think there are a lot more voices that need to be heard. And I think we recognize that there are a lot of cities that don't feel ready to put in place these policies. And we as a global community, and many of us city residents ourselves, really have a responsibility to support and enable this action. So even though this tweet and the precise current global dynamics didn't exist when I started as the co-chair on the Geo for Cities almost 2 years ago, which starts to feel like another world, the report, I believe, does help to provide a relevant and critical response to both. The report also lays out some of it. So the report is an extension of the UNEP flagship report, the 6th Global Environment Outlook Assessment, and it really enumerates the key environmental problems related to cities. And a few of those have already been raised, but you know, there are so many. For example, up to 80% of litter entering the oceans may be linked to mismanaged urban waste. And currently, around 2 billion people live in river basins that experience water scarcity, and this could increase to between 3 and 4 billion people by 2050. So we see a lot of issues around climate change, biodiversity, human health are really coming to a forefront in our cities. And of course, this is really unequally distributed, not only across the globe, but within cities, and with low-income urban communities suffering disproportionately. So this report, as with this session and so much of the work I think that city leaders are doing, really focuses on how cities can catalyze transformative change that's for a sustainable, equitable future everywhere. So within city boundaries, but also beyond them. It explores 3 dimensions of urban transformation and draws from examples from cities around the world and how to get there. We do, of course, recognize that the perfect ingredients for a just transformation for people and nature needs to be tailored to the specific city and circumstances. But we do think there are some key steps and some good examples that can help us to get there. So the first dimension focuses on circular cities and decarbonization. So achieving reductions not only in carbon and GHG emissions, but also with resource extraction, pollution, waste. One of the cities highlighted here is Beijing. And what Beijing has done is really coordinate decarbonization efforts across different sectors, industrial, transport, and waste management, but also by working with neighboring cities and provinces to maximize effectiveness. The second dimension the report focuses on is resilience and sustainable cities, so reducing the vulnerability of urban people and places to climate change by improving social and physical resilience. Here, the example of Cape Town actually provides an interesting example of what Cape Town did to really institutionalize and improve institutions in the threat of their day zero water crisis that now has been utilized in dealing with the latest shock event of the COVID-19 pandemic. Finally, the social inclusion and just cities dimension. So this really emphasizes the importance of inclusion of all urban residents, but also urban nature. One example here has been Seattle, which demonstrated with its Equity and Environment Initiative, where communities of color who have been most affected by environmental inequities are part of the long-term response to cleaning up a Superfund site with hazardous material. So really understanding what inequalities already existed and how they have different impacts on people due to ethnicity and income level, as well as sex, and really trying to address these with the cleanup responses. These are just some of the examples and potential pathways, but certain trends do seem to emerge for successful action. So, effectiveness of multi-sectoral, multi-level coordination is one. The need to really institutionalize, whether it's in the city government, in the national government, or through accountability involving civil society is important. And really the importance of inclusion and empowerment of marginalized communities. I do want to stress we certainly don't have all the answers. And, in many ways, one of the challenges in talking about transformation of cities is that while we see some steps in the right direction and some really excellent leaders to help show the way, we do also need to amplify more voices and experiences, as well as really critically explore what we can do better and how we can be more effective.
Okay, very good, Julie. Thank you very much indeed for that. I am, before I let you go, going to put you on the spot a little bit, because you mentioned Beijing and you mentioned Seattle and you mentioned some of the leaders here. I imagine it's also important to talk about the laggards and what is holding the laggards back. You don't have to point fingers and name names here, but what is it that generally is holding cities back in this transformation and this transition?
So this is an excellent question, not just because this is the part of the report that I actually thought I'll skip over this because maybe you've already know it. And so this is really what our one of our chapters focuses on. It focuses on these barriers of action and what has sort of locked us into this current business as usual. And so it looks at a variety of factors, but mainly it sort of comes down to three areas. One is the political economy. So one has to do with our extractive industries that have led, unfortunately, to a lot of the degradation. And again, sort of how this is unbalanced in its distribution globally, and that I certainly think contributes to laggard isn't the term maybe I would use, but in terms of, some of the more unfairly burdened cities. The second issue has to do a lot with urban planning and urban governance. Unfortunately, sort of the traditional way of planning, or even the lack of planning in a lot of places, has resulted in, a spatial distribution that is not the most conducive right now for people or for nature. And then the third is really the way that cities are connected to their, to their surroundings, but sometimes that is really difficult to deal with administratively, right? So ecosystems, like people, don't necessarily respect the administrative boundaries that we have. And there are a lot of challenges, I think, in coordinating this governance in ways that are most effective, whether it's for water or whether it's for transportation. And unfortunately, a lot of times cities have to rely on what's within their control. And this doesn't always provide the most effective response, I think, to some of our main challenges.
Okay, very good. Julie, thank you very much indeed. And thank you to Martina as well for those opening remarks and setting the stage so well for us. Right, we come to the first of three themed segments now for this session. And in this first segment, we examine the multiple benefits that could be achieved by ensuring our cities are greener. And we ask the question, How do we bring back nature to cities, and what are these multiple gains? We have four fantastic speakers, and I'm going to introduce them one by one. And the first is Kobe Brand, ICLEI Deputy Secretary General, Regional Director, ICLEI, of the Africa Secretariat. Kobe, can you hear me okay? Great to have you with us. I guess a simple question, but a fundamental question. What is, in your view, the value of nature in urban life? And what do we need to do to prevent irreversible loss to the natural systems that we depend upon?
Yeah, thank you very much, Axel. And I just wanted to make sure that you can hear me well as well.
Yep, we can hear you fine.
Thank you very much. So thank you for the opportunity, and what a wonderful and rich discussion already. Martina and Julie, they've raised very deep and important issues that warrant unpacking them further. But certainly the value of nature in cities, it's our livelihood. You know, we all depend on nature. Cities, and indeed all of humanity, depend on healthy natural environments and nature in cities that continuously provide us with a range of benefits or contributions to people living in cities in so many ways, and so many interconnected ways as well. And we know that infrastructure is very central to achieving the SDGs. And think about it, Martina also alluded to it, globally we are building the equivalent of a whole of a Paris per week, basically, in new infrastructure to meet the needs of our growing urban population. Imagine if we can fully integrate nature into the design and the build and rebuild of such infrastructure to minimize the negative impact of this infrastructure and make it nature positive, in fact. And we know that we can. We know the technology is there that we can actually do that. According to the World Economic Forum's Future of Nature and Business report, a nature positive pathway in the infrastructure and built environment could create over $3 trillion in business opportunities and create 117 million jobs by 2030. This is the type of bold action that the world needs right now. And GBO5 identifies sustainable cities and infrastructure as one of the key transitions to living in harmony with nature by 2050. And we know, I mean, COVID-19 brought, yes, indeed, a lot of opportunities as well, but it also put a lot of stress on already highly stressed city coffers. Some even say that in Africa, where I'm from, up to 60% of revenue is estimated to be lost at city and local government level through COVID-19. And this really undermines the critical investment in new and sustainable infrastructure. So current urban modernization projects are being shelved or cancelled, unfortunately, threatening the provision of very basic healthcare, subsidized housing, free education, and many other public goods. The ability of cities to transition to a carbon neutral economy is particularly at risk now. Over 10,000 cities have committed to such a green transition, but many of them are not able to finance it. So finance certainly stands out for us as one of the key aspects to be addressed. Another very directly linked challenge is that we all must rather urgently and fundamentally rethink and restore our relationship with nature in order to transform our economic models and market systems fundamentally. Maybe GDP is certainly not the way to measure success as we head to the future. So ICLEI is very happy and proud to note that the UNEP-MTS 2022 to 2025 has a much stronger and more inclusive approach to engaging local and regional governments, both in the vision and the work of UNEP, and we welcome the focus on nature. We would like to note that in order to fully optimize cities' potential to take action towards a green recovery and redesign within planetary boundaries and contribute to global environmental and health targets, we, number one, need more agency and representation in UN processes as a constituency. We need to be at the table where policies and goals are set, and we need clear mandates and also capacities for our constituency to implement these at the local level, where it's implemented best. And then secondly, we need more resources to contribute to achieving national and global sustainability goals and targets. So we need access to financing in ways that have not yet been unlocked. For many cities around the world, the opportunity to link into and to capitalize from global finance mechanisms simply is too cumbersome and too difficult for them to achieve. And we really, applaud the GEF's Sustainable Cities Impact Program, SCIP, and we want to see it grow in GEF 8. It's already very strong in GEF 7, and we applaud that. But we need many more instruments where partners, whole of society, whole of government actually form unusual partnerships with the private sector, with communities, with governments of all levels of governments to really create new lifestyles, better living environments for people, and a new decoupling almost of consumption patterns and natural resources. And let me just finally say, we need to foster very much the interconnectedness between global agendas, that of biodiversity, climate, health, pollution, and the social agendas, through systemic approaches that will bring these agendas closer together. We're particularly inspired by the One Health approach, which is fundamentally at its heart such a bridge building type of initiative. And yes, we saw during COVID-19 in the pandemic how much cities actually do need to reach to each other and connect. And through the initiatives that organizations and networks like ICLEI bring, Cities with Nature stands out. Cities with Nature is a free and open network for cities to come together, commit together, learn together, shape together, and report on their actions around mainstreaming nature in their cities. And during even the worst of times of the pandemic, we still see on a weekly basis cities flocking to this type of platform. So cities are going to connect, and UNEA 5 can help us to make them connect better and stronger. Yeah. I'll stop here, but thanks for the opportunity.
All right, but Kobe, I do have a very quick question, because I think you raise an important point, and there is such a focus, for obvious reasons, on the opportunities that are afforded us as a result of the context in which we're operating now. But is there a danger, very quickly, that we will take our eye off the ball when it comes to the parts that are really suffering as a result of this pandemic? And you mentioned the way cities are being affected. I imagine transportation budgets, for example, are being hit enormously because people don't want to ride the subway anymore, for example. Is there a danger that we're focusing too much on the opportunity and not really getting our house in order?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, what we're seeing is that cities are, we've got many collapsed cities, actually, where the infrastructure simply isn't able to cope with the demand, and where we don't do the basic things of just keeping those basic infrastructure systems in place, maintaining it, and addressing the most basic of needs of our citizens. So poverty is on the rise. I think we're not really pricing nature and its benefits correctly at all. So people still see and expect largely that a lot that nature provides us on a daily basis is just taken for granted and for free. Yep. So there's a lot of work to be done on the education side and the behavioral change side within communities, so that we can value nature for what it really is, and a lot of work for all of us to do collectively in that regard.
All right, very good. Kobe, thank you so much for sharing that with us. A quick reminder before we move on to everyone watching, if you've got questions, do submit them in the chat box, and I will do my best to get your questions to the speakers. Our next speaker is Yvonne Akisoya, the Mayor of Freetown, Sierra Leone. Yvonne, very nice to have you with us. Now, with the aim of planting 1 million trees, I believe is the number, over the next 2 years, Freetown, the Tree Town, has become an extremely well-known slogan. Tell us a little bit more about this effort to bring nature back into your city.
Thank you so much. Freetown, the Tree Town. pretty much says it all. The idea is to ensure that we are tackling so much of as what has been discussed already, the challenges with the lack of biodiversity. In our case, what we're seeing, as many African cities and other cities in the global south, is that the impact of climate change is resulting in abnormally heavy rainfalls, which leads to flooding in the absence of vegetation cover. We know that without that cover, not just flooding is a concern, but access to water. That's been mentioned as well. And of course, we have a situation where beautiful landscapes are just simply devastated with deforestation. The solution is not a simple one, but as many of other speakers have said, it's an urgent one. So our determination to plant 1 million trees over 2 rainy seasons is for practical reasons. And I must hasten to add that our target is not just to plant trees, but to grow trees, because those two things shouldn't be confused. There've been a lot of tree planting activities in Sierra Leone, in other parts of the world in the past, and you come back 5 years on and there's no sign of those trees. So it's critical that for us to have the impact that we want to have, that we focus not just on planting, but on growing. And what does growing mean? How do we do this? So the design of Freetown to Tree Town has at its heart ownership of the community. And the theme of this is, how do we bring nature back to cities? Part of bringing it back to cities is to ensure that the residents of the city are bought into the concept. And so we have the concept of tree stewards, which can be anybody in the community, anybody in Freetown, but we also have tree growers. And those are community-based organizations for whom this is now a job. When we come to benefits, I will mention the fact that this can also create jobs. We've talked about the ability for investing in green infrastructure and nature-based solutions to unlock job possibilities. So we have our tree growers, and very importantly, we're also working with a tree tracker app, a customized app, which enables us to ensure that every single tree planted is tagged. The details of that tree, location, GPS code is uploaded. And then every month, the progress of that tree is also tracked by taking photographs and just following through the life cycle. Now, it's not the only thing we're doing, because your question was quite broad in terms of nature-based solutions. So I'll just quickly say that there are 2 other things that Freetown is doing. Urban farming, which we introduced as a result of COVID-19. We felt that there was a risk that particularly women-led households would be exposed to more food insecurity in the event of lockdowns. So we've engaged with 300 female-led households to have small gardens in their backyards. And that's a way also of bringing nature back into the city. And those backyards are in slum communities. We specifically targeted those in informal settlements. And the third piece is really tied with Freetown to Tree Town, but it's not exactly the same, which is our beautification drive. So we have, in part of our sanitation work, we're dealing with a large number, our starting number was over 100. We've so far cleared 38, but we're dealing with informal, illegal dump sites in different parts of the city. And part of our strategy in clearing those dump sites is replacing them with green spaces. So planting, beautifying, putting flowers and trees. So those are 3 interventions, but let's quickly go on then to the benefits. The benefits go without saying. Biodiversity, we mentioned, being able to protect water catchments. The absence of trees leads to the absence of water. And in the current environment with increasing global temperatures, that's the last thing that we want to be seeing happening. So reversing that is important. Also important, of course, is the benefit that others get from what we're doing, which is increasing the carbon sink. So it's not happening, the Freetonians may not feel that directly, but others will do. We also have the benefit of lighter benefits when it comes to job creation. We've got, and when it comes to, the broader life of our residents, being able to mitigate against floods, being able to mitigate against landslides because of the absence of trees, particularly in a context of such as ours, where the geography of the city is one of hill, slope, and then hill, plain, and then the sea. So the flooding that comes about because hills are deforested, being able to reverse that is really critical. And that gives you a better sense of life, a better quality of life, having trees, the economic gains. I mentioned the jobs, but beyond the jobs of the tree growers, we also have the types of trees. Of the 12 species that we've introduced, 9 of them are economic. So they're fruit trees or they're moringa, they're trees of economic benefit. So there is that cycle as well. And of course, tourism. Freetown's a beautiful place. It looks less beautiful when there are no trees. So making sure that we're protecting that is key. So I may just stop here and say in summary that Freetown, a tree town. Oh, I must add one thing. A lot's been said about barriers to doing this. And you mentioned laggard cities, and I heard somebody say maybe not so much laggard, and I would really want to emphasize that the barriers that cities face, a major barrier is funding. Cities may want to do something, but their ability to do it is impacted by funding. So as a global community, more thought needs to be given to how we come alongside cities, particularly those in the global south, where there's a need, there may be a political will, there may be a desire, but accessing funding has been a constraint. We've still got more funds to raise. The funding that we raised for the first half of that exercise, planting our first 500 trees, didn't get us 500 trees because of delays with disbursement of funding, our Ministry of Finance. It got us 300,000 at best when we put everything together. And now we've gone back into the market, really teaming now, we hope, with the private sector with impact tokens. So giving people the opportunity to invest in trees, invest in those that we've already planted, to walk alongside us to grow them, but also to using the funding that you will put in. And we will obviously be able to track, and you will track the growth of your trees to enable us to plant more. So as we proceed with Freetown, the tree town, we're confident that 1 million trees will be planted, but we're also saying there's a wider challenge here. Access to finance for our city and others has got to be a key element that's addressed in order for us to bring nature back to our cities.
Sure. Fantastic, Yvonne. Look, and I have got a very quick follow-up question for you before we move on. And you talk about the challenges there, but with a view to sharing lessons with others, and we'll hear from Medellin in just a minute. You know, what have been some of the biggest mistakes you've made? You know, what have you learned the hard way in this process?
Wow, I think we've learned the hard way that if you don't have total buy-in and passion for this right across government, you can end up with a situation where, as we did, we raised $650,000 from the World Bank. That was approved in May. Disbursement did not happen until October. The rainy season is in May. October is the end of the rainy season. It's the dry season. So you can have the plans there in perfection. But what we need is also to have, and this is a broader challenge, which Kobe and others at ICLEI are well aware of, is this interplay between local governments and central governments. And when we come to addressing challenges of climate, we've all got to be aligned. And there's got to be an appreciation that what we're seeking to do is urgent. Planting trees is urgent. I'm not sure that the extent of that urgency, that sense of urgency is shared by all yet. And these are things that we should be looking at from a policy perspective. And I often say, where you have governments who are dependent on international funding, that's the lever right there. Yep. And it's important that we use those levers to raise to the fore, to take higher up on the agenda, the significance and the urgency around climate action. No one should delay investments which are working towards addressing climate change.
All right, Yvonne, fantastic. Many thanks for your intervention there. Yvonne Akisoya from Freetown. Carlos Cadena Gaitan is the Secretary of Mobility at Medellin in Colombia. And I imagine you follow well on the back of Mayor Akisoya there, Carlos. You're also implementing an ambitious program to green your city. Tell us more about that, and tell us about some of the benefits that you're already feeling there.
Steve, I guess you can hear me now.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if you
now. I can't see you, but I can hear you.
I am starting my video now. There you go.
There you are.
Thank you, Axel, and hello to everybody. I'm happy to follow up on Mayor Yvonne. In fact, I'm happy to see her again. Mayor Yvonne, hello. It's always a pleasure to hear your thoughts from Freetown. And I would definitely follow up on what was her final note, the sense of urgency, that's the urgent action, the call to action. And that's probably why this forum is so crucial. Science Policy Business Forum that also allows us to articulate actions from different sectors, as some of the previous speakers already mentioned. I continue to think that is one of the main challenges. Global climate policy action that includes all sectors around the world. Medellin is a city in Colombia, second largest city in Colombia, located high up in the Andes mountain range. And I'd like to comment on three major concepts, actually. The first one has to do with transition. Transition, one of the main topics across this forum. The second one has to do with concomitant action on low carbon and high density strategies that allow for greater biodiversity. And the third one has to do with the coherence with the global agenda. The first point is self-explanatory. Transition is the concept that we should be pushing forward. Transition allows us to think about a better future with specific projects, specific programs, without becoming extremely stressed out about the possibility that we need to promote urgent change. Some of our projects have to do exactly with that, the possibility to promote transition, socio-technical transition towards more sustainable development. And Kobe already summarized why cities are so crucial in this global agenda. Low carbon and high biodiversity, both of this at the same time, both of this as concomitant strategies. Some of our projects in Medellin have to do with this. Major Daniel Quintero, for example, decided on a very polemic but crucial project for the city of Medellin, and it is to turn the local airport. Medellin is one of those cities that used to have a local airport right in the center of the city. We still do, but we also have an international airport outside of the city. Some of these cases are well known around the world. Tempelhof in Berlin, the old airport in Quito, Ecuador, and some others. Mayor Quintero has decided to turn the local airport into a forest right in the middle of the city. Previous discussions have already explained why that high biodiversity and that network of nature-based solutions is so crucial for the future of urban society. But the fact that you could have a forest in the middle of the city, and we're talking a large forest here, 1.2 kilometers, it is huge, right in the middle of the city, has both the type of consequences that we would like from the socio-technical perspective, but it also has symbolic consequences, symbolic issues related to the fact that in the difficult world we live in, decisions can be taken from the political arena to promote exactly what we should be promoting. Blue and green infrastructure, nature-based solutions, many times, Axel. And if you have the same question for me, I'm going to answer it right now. Many times the challenge has to do with the fact that politicians do not take the right decisions at the right time. There is obviously lots of lobbying from all sorts of perspectives outside of the government. Finally, I would also like to discuss the issue of coherence with a global agenda. The world has a clear global agenda, Axel. This global agenda has derived from discussions in 1970, Club of Rome, 1972, Stockholm, 1987, Brundtland, etc., etc., etc. And some of this have already shown us the way. For example, derived from the Kyoto Protocol, the Bali Agenda, the failed or not failed Copenhagen meeting of the parties, we know that we should be promoting common but differentiated responsibilities in global climate change actions. We have advanced on this. Colombia and Medellin particularly have been struggling to find new ways in order to articulate to that global agenda, both as Mayor Yvonne discusses on financial terms, but also as I've been discussing on the coherence action. The agenda has been clear. Sustainable Development Goals and some other agendas have already shown us the way. And one example I would like to discuss, Axel, in order to finalize my introduction, is the NAMA. The NAMA, Nationally Appropriated Mitigation Actions, have been derived from that global agenda. And we have managed to join one of these NAMAs, specifically one connected to transport-oriented development, in order to transform one of the main districts in the center of the city. We are turning this small district, around less than 1 square kilometer, into an eco-district, applying every single technology and every single advance that science has already shown us should be applied in order for a small district in a city to turn both low carbon and high biodiversity agendas forward. This district will be one of the main ways in which we can turn the center of the city into a low emission zone, what in Spanish and in Beijing we have been calling the SWAP. I would like to end my introduction there, reminding everybody that from Medellin we think that the 3 concepts are transition, low carbon, high biodiversity, and the coherence with a global agenda. Thank you, Axel.
Thank you, Carlos. And I have a follow-up for you. And thank you for preempting my question on the political piece, which I won't ask now. But I mean, you talked to us a couple of times about integration, integrating, and this question comes in from an audience member, integrating climate plans with existing urban planning plans, forests in the middle of cities, NAMA, you mentioned. How difficult is it to advance plans like that in a city like yours?
Yeah, it's extremely difficult. I mean, but we have to live up to the challenge, Axel. There is no time. There are no excuses. One of the main challenges I would like to add for that integration, for effective integration, both between municipalities, but between dependencies and institutions within a single municipality, has to do with metropolitan governance. I think for cities in the global south, many cities in the global south, and particularly Medellin in Colombia, metropolitan governance is the key variable. Integration across the same metropolitan area with the different municipalities that compose a metropolitan area, and with multi-level governance playing a role. And with this, I mean regional governments, national governments, and of course, international institutions, is the main challenge for us. Metropolitan governance needs to be kept in mind. For cities like Medellin, this continues to be one of the main challenges.
Okay, Carlos, look, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. Super intervention. Thank you very much. Carlos Carreño Catan. And he talked a lot about biodiversity, and we're going to finish this segment specifically on that. Dr. Li Jiang is Secretary General of the Society of Entrepreneurs for Ecology Foundation in China. Dr. Li, you are doing a lot of work on the interaction between cities and biodiversity. How do we ensure we protect, and we just heard quite a bit about it there, but protect biodiversity in the urban environment?
Hi, Axel, and it's a great honor for me to be a panelist in this important section. As we know that there are many species living in our urban area. For example, one of the previous panelists mentioned the city of Beijing. Do you know how many bird species in Beijing now?
No, go on, tell us.
Well, there were about 450 bird species living during the whole years in Beijing. There are about 76 of them are resident, but many of them, they are migrants. For example, the Beijing, 70% 50% of the Beijing city covered by different kinds of forest, urban community parks, and there are many endangered species living in this urban city area. For example, we have different kinds of owls. We have kestrel living in my community, and well, in the tall building in Beijing, you can find common kestrel. I should say that we need to understand the biodiversity surrounding us in the urban areas, such as huge cities like Beijing, where we have about 22 million people living in these big cities. But we do have our local biodiversity. It's important for us to rely on the scientific research to know where they are, and we also need to rely on civil society for that. For example, our environmental education NGOs to have all these people living here in Beijing in major cities to understand, to know we do have biodiversity surrounding us. For example, Society of Entrepreneurs in Ecology Foundation, we support over 65 bird watching groups in different country cities across China, and most of them they organize different kinds of bird watching activities during the weekend for community peoples, especially for those children living in the major cities in China. And we also have one of the important biodiversity education program we called Biodiversity Carnivals. We already organized more than 40 events in 26 major cities in China across the country to introduce the urban biodiversity to local people, especially for those school children, to have them understand how many biodiversity they have, how many species living surrounding their communities. This is one of the example I want to tell all of you know that it's important to have our children, our people living in the urban areas to understand their local biodiversity and how important we have them understand this, and we can engage our government to protect or preserve our local urban biodiversity living surrounding us. For example, in Beijing, we support one of the famous local NGO called Big Cats Conservation Alliance, who did a lot of camera traps surrounding Beijing areas in Hebei province, in Shanxi province, in the forest, and they found there are very healthy population of a leopard big cats living in those areas. And originally in Beijing, in the mountain areas, we do have leopards, but now they disappeared after 20 years. But now we have a project called Bring Leopard Back to Beijing that we supported local NGOs and the local forestry department to restore the ecosystem in these urban areas surrounding us, Beijing city, and we hope we can bring the leopard big cats back to the city in near future. So that's why I think that it's important to have people understand biodiversity in urban areas, and it's also important to have our people understand, to know the biodiversity in our urban area.
All right, Dr. Li, thank you very much indeed for laying that out. We've heard a number of times about the need for global collaboration and for cities to learn to communicate with one another, to learn from one another. Two-part question. First, and I know you have to be, this is a delicate point for anyone, but how much support are you getting, the support you need, you think, from the policy side, whether it's local government or central government, first up? And secondly, how much international work and collaboration and communication is there? Because clearly there isn't enough right now.
Yeah, I think it's really important to have different cities in different continents to share the information, share the value of conservation for local biodiversity. For example, everyone knows that in New York, there is a Central Park, and the Central Park preserves the very important large forest and a park area in the center of a huge city like New York. In Beijing, it's the same. They want to build a Central Park in Beijing. For example, they have an ambitious goal of the Beijing government to rebuild ecosystem, restore the biodiversity in the urban area in the coming the fifth 5-year plan of the city. So they do learn a lot of experiences from other cities. And I personally believe that this kind of international dialogue and communications are really key to facilitate the different cities leaders and to develop environmental friendly policy to rebuild the biodiversity in their urban areas. And I think we can certainly facilitate this kind of dialogue communications from this civil society part.
Mm-hmm. And of course, very, very quickly to the first point, policy support is crucial, right?
Mm-hmm. I do believe so.
And generally speaking, just I mean, we've heard from others here. It's something that I guess needs to be pushed a little bit harder, right?
Yeah, I think with all different kinds of colorful environmental education program our civil society did in the past years, more and more people living in the urban areas, they do want to have a better living environment. They also want to protect those species living in the urban environment. So with the increase of this public awareness, I believe our leaders of the cities, they must understand, must heard the needs from the public to protect the urban biodiversity.
All right, Dr. Lee, thank you so much. Just a reminder to everyone who is with us, send in your questions. You can send in your questions on the platform. I have a broad question here, and maybe I'll just fire this at you, Kobe, if you're, hopefully you're still with us. And it's something we've touched on, but I'd be interested to get your views on it, how we can combine rising urbanization with the protection of forests, lakes, shores, especially in developing nations. What are your thoughts there, Kobe?
Yeah, I think you know the convergence of agendas is very important, and everything that's been said really point to us really taking on a stronger look at how we can actually bring the climate aspirations and the very many biodiversity aspirations together for win-win solutions. And there are many examples of that. And if we talk about these different ecosystems that come forth in cities and city regions, it's important to look at how we can link it to SDG targets, and not only those biodiversity and climate targets, but also our water targets, but many social targets as well. So they do come together, and I think that the solutions are there, the mechanisms are there. You also pointed, Axel, to the need for cities to connect, and I can't emphasize that enough, that we have really experienced a surge in cities' need to connect and also need to show what they are doing so that others can learn from it. During the pandemic, it became very obvious that cities really wanted to learn from another how to deal with the pandemic itself, and we're going to see more and more of that. So I think there's a strong unity in our constituency of cities and subnational governments. And just to say that I think, you know, the issue of cities and regions and their interconnectedness, one really needs to look at landscape-based approaches. Me living in Cape Town, I experienced almost day zero. Some cities, much smaller ones, have experienced, in fact, day zero, and it doesn't make the world press because they're not big, well-known cities. But one thing that stood out for me was how the community really came together in such a case where the farming community surrounding Cape Town had to give up their desperately needed water supplies for their agricultural practices. Inherently, the province in which the Cape Town is situated is an agricultural province, economically speaking, and they had to really give up their rights and their access to water and release it into the system to make sure that Cape Townians didn't experience day zero. So those trade-offs and connections between people in regions surrounding cities and those living in cities are going to come more and more to the front. And I think that's also very clear. And those partnerships that can be made between civil society and government to really address nature going into the future. It's a very exciting space. Yeah. So yeah, I think when we talk about forestry, or whether we talk about water resources, or whatever ecosystem we're talking about, it involves people, and we are the problem, as we heard the Secretary General of the UN say in his State of the Planet address in December last year. We are at war with nature, he said, but we are also the cause of it, and therefore we, as humanity, and very much so those people living in cities, are able to make a change. And I think that gives us all hope. But we need to act fast and we need to act boldly. And I can't emphasize the need to say that this is the time now to be bold, to stand together, to form new alliances amongst each other, and to maybe, doing something on your own is easy, but doing it together with 10 other organizations and so on, it's always more difficult, but so much more rewarding. And I think this is what times are calling for now.
All right, Kobe, thank you so much. And thanks so much to all of our speakers in that segment. And we want to come now to the second of these three themed segments: how integrated urban solutions can help cities alleviate the weight of cities and drive city transformation. And it actually segues perfectly to Annie Ruda Dasgupta, who I'm going to introduce first. Annie Ruda is a global director at the WRI Ross Center for Sustainable Cities. Tell us some of the challenges cities face when it comes to them becoming more sustainable, Annie, and how important is collaboration, as we've just heard?
Thanks, Alex. I would love to build on the fantastic things we heard from people who actually run cities, from Yvonne, from Medellin. I mean, from the perspective of the city, these issues of resource conservation, biodiversity are critical, but they're trying to solve. Just listening to Mary Yvonne, seems to me three bigger things, right? First of all, they're trying to solve jobs, right? They're trying to create jobs for people. The estimates are 2.5 billion more people live in cities. So cities need to be productive. But the second, one of the things, the cities are consuming a lot of resources. So one of the resources people keep talking about correctly, the land. Cities, 80% more land is supposed to be taken up by cities, which is concerning for many, many reasons that are pretty obvious. At the same time, 1 billion people in cities today, out of the 3.5 billion people in cities, live in informal shanty, whatever word people use in different countries, but basically substandard housing. So the question is, there is a lot of resource that is being used to create, but at the same time, there are a huge population in cities that require actually better services, in some way more resources. So the question is, how do you create an outcome that provides services to a large number of people while conserving resources, right? That is the conundrum most cities and city leaders face. And I want to just talk about integration in the perspective from our work. We work in maybe 100, 120 cities across the world. Actually, some of the leaders you just heard from. And our increasing view is that this idea of finding solutions that are more effective and more efficient, integration in a broader sense is a critical angle towards finding solutions. And I want to raise three kind of integration ideas that are, one is obvious one, right? Integration across sectors. So cities are shaped by how land use, how people live, people work, and how transportation works. That's how shape of city, and shape of cities matter a lot to how efficient or effective they are. So one of the obvious things is in most cities in the world, actually almost every, the people who manage land use and the people who manage the mobility are actually different groups of people in two different departments. And so the most obvious thing is, how do you integrate them? So how do you bring that together is the first step to see how you can be more effective and more efficient in not only resource use, providing better quality life, better quality cities, how you integrate open land. One of the programs that we are very involved in, I mentioned this because we are programmed with UNEP, with, you heard from COPE, with ICLEI, with C40. It is funded by Jeff, the Global Environment. So you will hear from Carlos Manuel a little later. It actually is to create impact on cities. How do you create practices that brings this integration? So one of the things we're supporting in this is a project in Costa Rica that brings rail services connecting cities. And not only does it bring transportation, but creates integrated land use, uses a higher density use of land around this transport nodes, creating biking towards the station. So this integration of these two sectors is a key issue. That is the most obvious one. Yeah. The second one I feel of integration is the integration across jurisdiction. And you just heard people talk about how policies in cities, in the region, and the national government needs to be connected. You cannot do solutions if you cannot actually figure out how to work across jurisdiction, because most solutions, say air quality or water or land use, require multi-jurisdictional policies or integration. That is one of the key things. So water is a great example of this, of how, or air quality. Today, because of COVID, there's a lot of discussion on air quality. You can't deal with air quality if you can't bring governments around you, local governments, to work together. So the multi-jurisdictional integration is very critical. And I just want to add to that, it's not just spatial, but it's also institutional, right? You heard from Mayor Akiswar how national policies impact immensely how cities can perform. In her case, the money that was allocated to her did not come in time for her to do what she needed to do. So now this vertical integration of policy institutions is critical. The third one I want to point out is actually integration of outcomes, which is not something we talk about a lot. I feel these cities we're talking about, Global South, they're immensely constrained on finances, also capacity. So how can they do things that meet multiple goals? What solutions are there that helps them do multiple things? When I say multiple things, the three obvious things: how they actually create a more productive society so that there are jobs for new people in the cities. How do they create higher quality of life so everyone in the city has access to services? You heard Mary Yvonne talk about it. And finally, while doing these two things, how do you are more efficient? How do you become greener? So these are the three outcomes cities are looking for at the same time. And there are solutions, and this is what ICLEI and people like us can really help highlight solutions that bring these three outcomes together so that cities can focus on few things and do them to arrive at multiple outcomes. So for example, one of the things we're working on with multiple partners in African cities is on water resources. So water scarcity is one of the biggest things. There are 200 cities that will be without water soon. How do you help cities think about water with their region? So not only water across the departments in the city, but also in the region. So the productivity with water is a very critical issue. How can cities and regions can think together to bring solutions that are focused, that allow cities to focus their resources, but get multiple outcomes in place? So I want to emphasize the solution-specific view is very helpful for us to think through how to cut across this multiple, very important goals we're talking about here, Axel. Thanks.
No, thank you, Anna. And I want to pick up on a couple of things. First, I guess local solutions versus global solutions. How much collaboration are you seeing when it comes to banding together to sort out some of these issues?
Terrific question. And so every city in the world is different, right? Their local context, their local politics is different. So solutions, actual specific solution, the best ones are crafted locally. But there are a lot of patterns, knowledge across cities that can be shared and that can accelerate solutions. That is clear. And the best part of this is cities learn best from other cities. And there are a lot of city networks that are doing an extremely good job in bringing up solution, learning from each other. You heard from Medellin. Medellin has done a fantastic job doing this green corridors that they have shown actually reduces temperature. Other people have learned about it. There are cities that are trying to replicate those things. Mayor Akisuara is trying to do cable transport system that has been actually already tested in a few cities in Latin, including Medellin. So I think this learning from each other is active, could be actually much more. But at the same time, we need to be careful that we are not rubber stamping solution. We are allowing local solution to grow, the learning across. And so that is something we as an organization focus a lot on, like what are we learning here and what are transferable and what are not transferable.
The other piece I wanted to ask you about it, and this is a real layperson's question, so forgive me if I misunderstood something here. But we talk about integration. You have city dwellers, urban dwellers, and you have country dwellers. I mean, we have it here in the UK, and they have very, very different mindsets. They have very different ways of looking at things and coming up with solutions and even coming to an agreement on what requires a solution and what doesn't. I mean, in terms of that sort of integration, sort of psychology, how critical is that?
That is immensely critical to get them to work together. So I use an example for water for you just earlier, which is true so actually where you live in UK. Water, or use of water, is a critical issue because water is a very finite resource. It is required for agriculture, but it requires for cities, and cities actually consume a lot of water, and politically in a region, cities are politically normally more powerful and actually consume larger share of water. You cannot actually find a solution for long-term sustainability of water cycles if you do not actually find a way to work together. So I feel it's a very good question, that how we talk about water across jurisdiction, because they have a very different perspective, right? Of water, what water is. And most of the aquifers are outside city jurisdiction in most cases. So I'll give you an example in Bangalore. Very good example where we need to think together. So Bangalore, there's a lot of development outside the city jurisdiction. This large development on used to be farmland that are getting far away from city. I don't want to comment on the fact that it's not a good to develop our reference. But the key thing, our research shows that all these developments, a lot of them, are being built over very important aquifers, literally on top of it. And Bangalore is a water scarce city. Bangalore is planning to pump water 700 kilometers from where. So when you build concrete things on top of aquifers, that aquifer doesn't get charged. That development impacts the city. It is not inside the city. Yeah. So if you don't have a planning process that allows that conversation, it's impossible almost to find a sustainable solution. And then you keep pumping water for 700 kilometers, which is intensely energy intensive. So very much like your question, but this idea of having the common language, Axel, maybe people like you should be working with us to help us with the language part.
Well, let's talk more. Anuruddha, many thanks for your thoughts there. I want to bring Anu Ramaswamy into the discussion, co-author of the IRP report, The Weight of Cities at Princeton University. Anu, thanks for being with us. You co-authored this report. Just, headline thoughts here. I know it's going to be hard in a few minutes, but what are the big challenges that lie ahead, and what are the levers that you've identified, the best ones to alleviate this weight?
Wonderful. Thanks for having me here. Can you hear me?
Yep, can hear and see you fine. Okay,
great. So I should just say for one quick minute, the United Nations International Resources Panel is a group of academic and national lab researchers that work with government and with the communities to look at more efficient resource use. And so it brings another network of academics to work with cities and networks of cities and with the private and public sector for sustainable cities. And so the report, the Weight of Cities report, set out to say that is there a common framework? Yes, we have different types of cities, but is there a common framework for all cities whether they're in developed or developing parts of the world, to reduce their resource use, including fossil fuels, which lead to greenhouse gases, but also land use, more efficient water use, material use, with attention to protecting biodiversity as well. And so the report came up with 4 levers. The first one, 4 levers that work together to make all cities more resource efficient. And the first is a more compact, walkable urban form. So more compact, walkable land use. That's sort of the base layer upon which all of our physical infrastructure systems are built up. And those physical systems are the ones that draw in resources and provide services to urban residents. And so thinking about single sector efficiencies in the sectors we've talked about: buildings, wastewater, energy, food supply. So if we can make all of those efficient, but then the third is really quite unique, that cities have this great potential to offer exchange of resources because we have homes, businesses, industries, and all these key provisioning systems coming together and converging in cities. If we can, and many cities are doing this, if we can start recycling, recirculating, creating a circular economy with value chains, we call it cross-sector symbiosis. And so cities, urban areas are great places to do that. That's the third lever. And then that's part of providing regenerative resources to cities. And then finally, you have the fourth lever, which is behavior. Lifestyle. So much can be done in terms of lifestyle change and behavioral interventions towards sustainable consumption. And all of those 4 levers act together. And the report's key message is that we can do this both in new cities that are being built, particularly because the impact will be so much higher, as well as existing cities. And I'm also part of a US National Science Foundation supported Sustainable Healthy Cities Network. And academics are able to offer data, for example, data on all cities in India or all cities in China that can be useful for implementing the circular economy weight of cities strategy. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Look, I think there are a number of questions we want to ask you, and I know Carlos is waiting as well, and I'll come to Carlos in just a second. But a question comes in. It's a general question on the encouragement of public-private partnerships in sustainable urban solutions, and how, I guess, important. I mean, we talk about PPPs a lot, in this space. How important that sort of collaboration is. How much does that feature in the report?
So the feature has the whole section on governance, and the governance talks about multi-level as well as cross-sector collaborations, and also collaborations, as we spoke, between sort of knowledge partners, cities, private and public sector. So both of those are a significant part of it, and one of the key messages is to encourage urban experimentation. So the more experiments we have and the more we learn, and these are real experiments in real cities, but tracking them and learning from them across cities, particularly as you mentioned, is important. And the second aspect was financing, thinking through financing and tying financing to outcomes that are measurable.
What are some of the most interesting urban experiments that you've come across in your research?
So I think one of the most important ones is actually learning about what do we know about compact, walkable urban forms. And we can now actually see some of this literally from space through satellite and other observations. It's different versions of this relate to well-being in different parts of the world, right? If you have a more walkable, green space, accessible city, that's one of the most impactful experiments. How can we expand this and see different types of urban forms that are relevant in different parts of the world? I think the second is actually circular economy. the exchange of resources within cities. There's a lot, we think it's not happening, but actually I mentioned in another panel, there's a lot of resource exchange, for example, happening in Indian cities, which is rarely documented. And so how do we understand what's already happening and not put in procedures that prevent that from happening in the future? So I see those two, and the third is the preservation of sustainable lifestyles. Very often there are existing sustainable lifestyles that end up going away as we urbanize. And so thinking through and looking at those parts of the world where people have been able to preserve those lifestyles. So I guess I see three major experiments.
Very good. Anu Ramaswamy, thank you very much indeed for sharing your thoughts with us. Carlos Manuel Rodriguez is the CEO of the Global Environment Facility, GEF, and of course the former Environment Minister of Costa Rica. Carlos, thank you very much for being with us. We've just heard about a number of the challenges that cities are facing. How is the Global Environment Facility considering, if you like, these challenges?
Hello, Axel, and what a pleasure to see you and see everybody. Before answering your question and hearing the panelists, I just want to try to position something which is important, and that we at the GF see it very clearly, which is a kind of a chronic or endemic problem that we deal as we try to make cities more sustainable, which has to do with the national and local environmental agencies. You know, Axel, very well that probably before the 1992 Rio Summit on Sustainable Development, most developing countries didn't have an environmental ministry or an environmental agency, as opposed to developing countries which began building their environmental institutionality after the first Sustainable Development meeting in 1972. So if we position ourselves in 1992, when most of the developing countries out of Rio 92 began designing their environmental agencies, most of the environmental problems were not located in the cities. They were located in the rural areas. Most of the countries were rural, their economy were rural. And from 1992 to today, there has been a strong shift in many developing countries, which became more urban than rural. And that meant that we were unable to prepare for those shifts and prepare the institutions for the new environmental related challenges which are totally located in urban areas. In my region, Central America, Latin America, where I come from, the transition from a rural-based economy or society into an urban one happened so quickly, Axel, that we were caught off guard from the policy and institutional point of view that makes us really, really challenging now to come up with the institutions and the right policies. So this is, I tend to believe, a very, very important element that we need to take into account, meaning that, under the structure of governance of cities, we should really support and work with them in a way that we can bring the very successful solutions and cases that we generate in the rural environmental agenda into the urban one. So this element is extremely critical in this context. So one of the main objectives of the GF in our Sustainable Cities program nowadays is very much focused on how do we assist countries in facing, the post-COVID challenges. As you know, all major cities are facing fiscal constraint. They have stress capacities to respond to the very basic elements. But at the same time, this is a great opportunity to create new policies, new incentives, and investment that can help us greening up the a sustainable growth in cities. And also, when we talk about the integrated approach, which is a big issue that has mentioned here, I tend to believe that COVID gave us at the city level, at the urban level, a great understanding, because we were forced by COVID to move an integrated approach across departments, and the need to coordinate with national governments to respond to COVID-19. So I tend to believe that we were forced because of the pandemic of these very specific solutions. So with respect to GF, we're just entering the 8th replenishment process. As you know, the GF works on 4-year cycles, and we are in the early stages of GF 8. And we're very clear, Axel, that as the environmental problems shift from rural areas into urban areas, our programs to deal with that and support countries continues to grow and must grow. We center our political objectives of the next cycle on the green, blue, clean, and resilient recovery. And yes, of course, this means that the GF has a huge interest in issues related to support the political leadership in cities, to expand, amplify the nature-based solution in cities. And the integrated approach is something which is very clear to us and can help us do a shift in urban planning. Cities need to really embrace nature as one of their sectors, not just one element that is a responsibility of some person somewhere in a small department or office in the city. We need cities that can become the real champions, the stewards and guardians for nature. We need to set the right incentives because as we see the Dasgupta report and many other reports, we tend to see those nature economic reports. We tend to see them, what is happening in the forested areas, what is happening in the high seas and the forest. This is also happening in the core of the operation of the big cities. We invest more resources and activities that contribute to climate change, that degrade the nature and the environmental services than what we invest to green up the cities. And yes, there are some very interesting examples on how countries are doing an effort to shift the tax burden from taxpayers to polluters. And I tend to believe that, and this is in the core of the Dasgupta report that was recently presented and many others. So leading this process, Axel, in cities is one of the main priorities that we have at the GF, helping cities leveling the economic playing field and working with them in phasing out those perverse incentives and negative investment. We need all to remember that the commercial bank and the development bank are still financing a lot of activities which won't help us to be zero emission or net positive in 2050.
Sure. Okay, Carlos, thank you. Quick question. I have got a wary eye on the time, but a quick question to you. Who are the champions, Carlos, in your view?
Well, the champions are the Bonds and Carlos that we just heard before this panel. These are the real champions. And, it is very interesting to hear Yvonne saying that this is going to be Freetown instead of Freetown. Of course, the local political leaders are the champions, should be the champions, but at the end of the day, actually, the real champions are the what I call the sub 30. All those guys younger than 30 years old. These are the young generation that grew up in a rural area, and they got very clear the sustainability agenda. As a matter of fact, the sub 30, those guys beneath 30 years old, will have a big political influence in how they elect their public officials at the city and at the national level. So their aspiration in terms of greening up the cities, in terms of gender equality, in terms of a new paradigm for mobility, will force one way of others the political agenda into that direction. I tend to believe that, you know, when I was a kid, our issues were deforestation, and we made that change in many countries. Now this young generation much better prepared than my generation, and probably even more passionate that my generation will definitely do the change forward.
Mm-hmm. All right, Carlos, thank you so very much for your thoughts and for your passion. Carlos Manuel Rodriguez from the GEF. Right, we're shifting gears a little bit here. Enabling the transition, technology and innovation is the subheading for this next bit. So the private sector's role here, and what of course is critical here is getting the frameworks right, ensuring the integration that we've been talking about across all sectors. We've got 7 or 8 super guests lined up for you here. I'm going to have to stress that we've got to keep these presentations reasonably tight if we want to get to the questions from the audience. But let me introduce the first speaker. Emmanuel Nasser Bridia is head of the Urban Resilience Initiative at Meridiam. Meridiam is an investment fund with a socially responsible purpose. Emmanuel, thanks very much indeed for joining us. We've just heard about the tremendous challenges that cities are facing. Tell us a little bit more about your business model and why it makes sense for an investment fund to focus on sustainable infrastructure.
Yes, thank you for letting know the opportunity to exchange on these quite key matters. So as you said, Meridiam is an investors and developers of long-term sustainable infrastructure. We have been created 15 years ago with this key objective, is to provide community with efficient and sustainable infrastructure to cover the essential needs of the population. So, which means that we are quite active with today 80 assets in our portfolios in more than 25 countries. And we have invested in more than 8 billion, which represent more than 65 billion of capex on new infrastructure. And the reason for us to be so deeply involved in these sectors is because we believe that the sustainability of the city are now the key element in order to achieve the sustainable goal that we all have in mind. So, which means that based on our experience, it was pretty clear that we can find ways to align the objective of the private sectors in terms of return with the objective of the community to develop sustainable infrastructure. So our strategy is to move from the private sectors and to make the link with the public sectors to better understand what is doable and to create pipeline of projects which are investable from the private sectors, in order to find solution to allocate this billion of flows available from the private sectors to the sustainability of the world, and more precisely today, the sustainability of cities. We launched a new initiative because we recognize the key element of the city in the new challenges that we have to face globally and the key challenges of each individual cities. So we launched a new initiative together with the UNCDF and the Rockefeller Foundation to leverage on all the work that the city already done in order to identify their key priorities, the key challenges, and in order for us to be able to work together with the cities, with the public authorities, to provide our expertise, to provide our know-how and resource, which can be human resources, but also financial resources, to unlock the delivery of some of these key infrastructure projects. So we have identified 4 to 5 main sectors, which can be energy transition, e-mobility, circular economy, and resource management. So these sectors and also healthcare and education. And what we do with the city is to see how to deploy an integrated solution to answer this key element. And we want to be able to deliver infrastructure which contribute to this objective. So let's take an example. We know that e-mobility and mobility is key in order to reduce the congestion of the city to have a more sustainable city. So we work with cities like Dakar in order to see how to create some new way of mobilities, how to develop this project with the BRT line. We also want to create some traffic management system and to attract the private sectors to finance such type of initiative. We also have additional initiative on the waste to energy. We are currently deploying a waste to energy new plan in Poland in order to provide electricity to a city of more than 270,000 inhabitants. And this is by developing this new infrastructure, testing what's matter for the community, that we can make the link. The message today is to make the link between the private and the public sectors, to know better who is doing what, and to work together on a more programmatic approach to deliver what the city would like to have in terms of key priorities, which has been already identified, mainly thanks to the resilience plan, but also to any type of additional element. Yep. And this is the initiative that we are currently launching together again with the UNCDF and the Rockefeller Foundation.
Super, Emmanuel. Thank you very much indeed for sharing that with us. Look, I want to move on to Martin Powell. Martin is head of urban development at Siemens, a leader, of course, in the industrial space, but in many different spaces, I should say. Martin, Siemens have worked with mayors and cities, across the world on planning carbon reductions and focusing on integrated solutions to achieve them. What drives a company like Siemens to get into this?
Yeah, it's a great question. What I thought I'd do is take you through what we see as the big urban technology trends. I'll take you through 5 of them in a minute each, I promise. That's, obviously we want to follow as a business, but we're following it because we're seeing this happening in big cities around the world. The first is a huge shift to electric vehicles, and not just cars. I'm talking about buses, airports, ports, a real increased electrification that's going on around the world. But this brings real risk of how we use urban space for charging equipment, for the equipment to just power those chargers, and that's really going to erode a lot of our green spaces in big cities. We see a sort of citywide energy master plan that needs to be created to deal with this transition if we want it to be resilient, reliable as a system. Quick example, Los Angeles would need 192,000 electric chargers to make all their cars electric in the next 30 years, which is the ambition of Eric Garcetti. And just to let you think about that, that's 120 new chargers built every week for the next 30 years, right? So just to give you a sense of the scale of the challenge there. Second big trend, we need to really transform our building stock, homes and offices into mini power stations using distributed energy solutions, solar, small wind. This will bring a lot more off-grid capacity, obviously building much more resilience across the city, and more importantly, some affordability. And of course, if we transition off fossil fuels using the likes of solar, we'll do a significant reduction in NOx emissions and air pollution improvement. So a lot of equity across the city there as well. We can really overcome inequality in quite a lot of communities. The third is we're seeing a real uptake in polluter pays mechanisms like congestion pricing, low emission zones. They're fantastic tools for cleaning up the city, getting rid of congestion. I personally believe every city should have one. They shouldn't think about it. They should just get on and do it. They bring revenue, investment in public transport. They really drive up cleaner emissions. The fourth is a need to bundle solutions. We need to take an example, you put solar on a hospital roof, but you need to combine that with lots of energy efficiency measures, so you reduce how much you actually consume in the first place, put some green walls in, green the common areas, take some of these hard pavements away. If you bundle all that together, the quick and the long payback periods still make these very viable, but of course you solve these greater issues and get the co-benefits as you go along. And finally, the fifth one, we need to connect our infrastructure to a common data platform. We have the ability now using IoT to analyze data sets across different infrastructures. It means we can prove the business cases much more successfully, far fewer failures in the projects and demonstration projects that are done. And as long as the business cases keep the need to preserve and promote nature, then I think we will prevail. A final point, my time in the London Mayor's office taught me that good ideas are hard to kill. So spending some time proving the case, building in long-term planning and thinking about those things will really work. I give one example in Cheongdae-cheon in South Korea. They had an expressway hugely congested through the city, carried 160,000 vehicles every day, was congested, polluted. They didn't just put a few measures in to fix that. They just took the whole thing out, replaced it with a 9-kilometer stream and a linear park, and to replace the vehicles, they put 98 kilometers of busway in. This is fantastic long-term planning. It's real thinking, putting nature at the heart of the solution, and I applaud it.
Yeah.
And that was done nearly 20 years ago. So,
Martin, don't get me started on the Garden Bridge in London. Yeah, I don't want to talk.
I was not a fan, by the way.
But there is actually one really quickly. There is one thing I want to ask you. I mean, you mentioned Eric Garcetti in Los Angeles. You mentioned Sadiq Khan in London. I mean, Garcetti in particular, real champion of the sort of work that you're doing in this space. Of course, the real challenge for you guys and for business must be for working with politicians who are much less open to moving forward in this space.
I mean, I've yet to really find a mayor that isn't open to it. Some may resist certain aspects of these things, but if there's a business case behind it, they you know, like all good mayors, they have to evaluate the full economic benefits, the co-benefits to the city. If you put measures in, often they have additional impacts that we don't always monetize. You know, these external externalities like air pollution. You know, if you have fewer people going for asthma treatment on bad air days because you've solved certain traffic issues, you know, the mayor's thinking about that all the time. So it's up to actually the private sector to help present these wider benefits and really show a pathway to getting some more of these projects done.
All right, very good. Thank you so much, Martin. Anton Koller is President District Energy at Danfoss. So this is the energy piece. Danfoss is a leader in district energy systems. Anton, welcome. District energy systems are a really good example, of course, about a good example of the sort of integration and circularity that we've been talking about. Tell us more about the benefits of these technologies and give us some examples of Danfoss's work in this space.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for having me here today. And it's a great pleasure to talk about it. And yeah, district energy and an opportunity for city. And you can say, why is this important? And you can say that heating and cooling accounts for approximately 55% of all the energy consumed in buildings. And still 75% of this is fossil fuel based. So we have quite a task here to decarbonize this. And what is district energy? District energy, we put big pipes in the ground with hot water and cold water. And by this, we are heating and cooling the building. And this is the far most energy efficient system when you compare it with individual solutions like gas boilers or heat pumps or chillers. Yeah. And you can make the comparison with the electricity grid. Yeah. Electricity, we also have one common grid, and we don't produce electricity in the individual buildings. Yeah, so it is also clearly that this is the way forward if you like to have an efficient system. And it's also not only an efficient system, it's also resilient and flexible because it's an thermal energy infrastructure where you at all time can connect different sources. You can collect waste heat along the pipes and along the pipeline. So this is very flexible to adapt, yeah, and resilient, because you can also switch technology. So you have no lock-in effect. I think in this energy transition, it's so important that you look not only a few years ahead, but 10, 20 years ahead. And maybe today we have a, best sources using solar, but maybe 5 years down the road, you maybe like to add something else, and that easily can be done on a district energy network, which is basically bumping around hot or cold water. And another very important aspect for cities is that it's really, so to say, localizing the value chain. So the energy value chain is localized because an energy network is tailor-made to the city. So you will utilize the best sources you have. Either you have thermal, geothermal available, or you may have free cooling from the sea available. So you can really localize the value chain for your city. And I think this is a very important aspect. And also discussed before on what solution is the best for cities. It is not a global solution. It is a solution really tailor-made for a specific need and for a specific city. And just sharing some example, I think it's also Copenhagen, which are going for CO2 neutral by 2025. They have a district where they really built that up, and this is Nordhavn, where we have a low temperature district heating there, and there all the energy part is integrated. I think going forward, it's important that we really look for sector integration, that meaning integrating from transportation to other energy carriers, so electricity to heat, that this is connected. And also the planning aspect, as also some have said before, is important to have a complete planning approach to this, so you can address the challenges. And I think there are very good examples, but one is also example what we are talking here. We are creating a lot of good energy in these discussions, so you can say heat, but I think the real heat is going back in the servers of this of the Zoom servers in the data center.
Yeah.
And you can utilize this heat from data centers. So heating and cooling are moving together, and we actually do this around the world for the big players, but also for ourselves and our data center in Norborg in the headquarters. We are utilizing this surplus heat and put it back into the district heating network of the local city. So I think these are all very good examples how things can move forward. And I think for us, it was important, so to say, in a call to action, what is now important going forward, I think is, speed, yes, I think implementation speed, that we are not waiting for something to happen, but simply go on and do it, particularly with the green recovery and all the stimulation packages which are available, that we really do it. And then the policy framework, I think it's important to say, what do we like to tackle? We like to tackle climate change. So CO2 tax is extremely important to get that transition going. I think this is a very important part what we see.
Yeah.
And then important at the end, I think is always take energy efficiency first and then decarbonization. From a study in Denmark, we can show if you go that way, you can maybe halve the cost of the energy transition when you really look first of energy efficiency and then the rest you decarbonize. So that was my short impact, Axel.
Very good, Anton. Thank you so much. Fascinating. I mean, we talk about the heat generated from the Zoom servers, to heat cities. Yesterday, of course, we were talking about the footprint that all of that creates and how to offset that. So another interesting part of the discussion. Very quickly, though, Anton, I want to ask you, and this is a question I think for a lot of industry and technology and innovation. How do we ensure that? And it comes from one of the audience members. How do we ensure innovation and the use of new technology in urban settings are inclusive?
Yeah, I think district energy is an infrastructure. Yeah, so I think it's very inclusive because it's covering all. And I think particularly in heat, you have also heat and energy property. So I think it's important that you have in the planning aspect that everybody is covered and inclusive in that sense, that it is not, so to say, locked. Yeah, and I think particularly on district energy, you have very different commercial models out in the place. So the example in Denmark, it's a non-profit setup, community setup, where, so to say, the whole community owns the district heating network. So I think there are different approaches to do that.
Yeah. Okay, very good. Anton, thank you very much. Harry Fahaz, Head of Global Public and Government Affairs at Signify. Nice to see you again, Harry. Obviously, you've looked at, or you look at lighting, buildings, e-mobility, energy efficiency across all of these different sectors. What's the best way of getting these sectors to cooperate in going after efficiency?
Yeah, first of all, Axel, good to see you, be it virtually. Yeah. And I hope the sound and the image is reasonable, because I had to switch to my phone.
I can see you.
Yeah, I would also like to thank the previous speakers, and particularly also Anton, on mentioning the principle of energy efficiency first, and also the underpinning the relevance of integrated approaches. I think first of all, as a big picture, we see that that currently we are in an economic downturn, had a crisis because of the corona pandemic. And while that seems just about manageable, if we would let climate change fully unfold, then certainly in our cities, that would be completely disruptive. So the first thing we need to integrate is to combine tackling climate change with all the initiatives on economic recovery. And particularly in Europe, we see there's a whole program, and I'll come back to that, with 5 focal areas. And if we see there how the dots are connected, that really, really helps. Before doing that, I'd like to touch upon lighting. So not just because it is our business and that we know it well, but also we see that in cities, quite often up to 50% of a city's energy bill is lighting. So the street lighting, public offices and schools. And with LED lighting, which is no secret, because I think that this is already known for quite some time, so up to 80% of that energy can be saved. And then the savings that can be also reinvested in healthcare, in education, many of the many other areas that matter. And we are, let's say, about a third, maybe halfway to that whole transition to connected LED lighting. But still, even in Europe, looking at the Green Deal, we've made some calculations. Even EU27 can save still 40 billion euros per year and 100 megatons in carbon emissions if they further had this whole transition. And for that, if we then look at the European Green Deal, and I would say this also contains the elements and the focal areas that are universal. So at the core, the transition needs to be green and digital. But if you look at the 5 areas that are in there, one is renovation wave, which is also where most of the funding is going to. But if you look then at lighting, so also in buildings, if we would move to connected LED lighting, there's huge savings, but also you would make a building smart, allowing not only post-COVID, but also in general, a smarter use of the floor space. But also we see quite a few examples where this is one of the components, and not the only one, but one of the components of making buildings healthier and better places for people, so that their productivity improves without having to work even more hours. So there's this 1990 rule, I think JLL once defined it in this way. So what you save on the energy bill is maybe 1, how would you spend? On floor space, on the building itself, like 9, but 90% of the costs are in people. So you see there, if we adopt the right spectrum of energy efficient solutions, so including building management that Siemens had just spoke about, including district heating and including lighting, and then we can make huge economic and social gains. And the second part there is Cleantech. And often we think then about solar and wind, but in our case, we also see a growth, and certainly for emerging and developing countries, an opportunity to leapfrog to solar LED street lighting, which is zero energy. And interestingly, if you would install 15 solar LED streetlights, it may sound like a small thing, but then you save the electricity that is needed to charge an electric car for a full year. So even there you see that if you integrate approaches, it makes sense and it has multiple benefits. Well, circular is the third pillar that speaks for itself, doing things smarter. But also there, you see huge advances in manufacturing technology. So we all know about 3D. Well, we are moving to 3D printed luminaires, which means that also a lot of carbon emissions from the supply chain are removed, because you can make them local, on demand. You don't have to work heavy, huge stock levels, and lots of things there. Electric vehicles is another one. So it was touched upon already. So we need a huge amount of electricity to power all those cars, and not only the charging points, but also the power that goes through it. And yeah, where's most electricity being used today? That is in buildings and the built environment. So another reason to accelerate renovation of existing buildings, and thus to free up the electricity that is needed to charge a car. And interestingly, on average, a household in Europe as well as global uses the same amount of electricity as you would need for one electric car for the full year. So you see how then even the order of magnitude touches upon each other. And the last pillar of the European Green Deal is biodiversity and farm to fork, so the food agenda. And we see there also a growing relevance of lighting for horticulture, vertical farming, for fish farming even. So then you can increase productivity of fish farming by using light. So I won't go into that now. But did you know that if you look at food miles, if you'd have a kiwi on your table here in Europe, about a third of his weight is spent on kerosene. Let's say lettuce travels 1,500 miles before landing on your plate. So if you can produce food more locally, also using 90% less water, no pesticides in many cases, and then let's say these integrated approaches, they are really much needed. They may sound like high tech. Well, they are, but they are here today. They have a lower carbon footprint, and they got all these wider benefits. So maybe I'll stop there. But then, in that sense, let me add one more thing. So there are also quite a few policy enablers, and this is not Einsteinian or high science, because if we would apply what you could call circular procurement, so taking the life cycle impact into account, if we would look at what accounting rules, there's also quite some work being done financially on allowing investments in these approaches, these more resource efficient approaches to be off balance sheet, where cities have high debt levels today. And then also to look at business models that are more service-based instead of just invoicing hardware. I think those are also the policies that will make this happen. So again, it can be done today. And I would say let's look also at those programs like European Green Deal that have been defined. The technology exists. We have had some speakers looking at that and more coming. So it's more like, then putting our hands on the plow and getting the work done.
Yeah. All right, Harry, thank you so much. Actually, I did want to mention, I mentioned a quiz that you guys are running at the start in the live poll section. Do you want to just say something quickly about the quiz?
Yes, so Shireen Zorba and I, so we worked on a few questions, because quite often it's also interesting to look at, not let's say generic and the qualitative need to move on, but also to look at some of the real data. And I don't know who will run the quiz, but let's say latest I know is that there are 6 questions.
Okay.
And it would be interesting to see, because we're all, I think, on the same wavelength in this event. But then, how much do we know? Of sometimes when you look at facts on and you translate them to what it means for one person or for a certain area. How massive the challenges are and the needs to indeed double our efforts in the right direction.
Well, whilst you've been talking, a question has come in specifically for you. So let me ask you this. Most cities are old cities. What are the key enablers to accelerate the renovation of city infrastructures towards carbon neutrality?
So the enablers is really to accelerate renovation rate, because it's not new. We need to more than double renovation rate to 3% per year, and then combine that with advancing renewables to arrive at carbon neutral infrastructure later by 2050. But that's really to go to circular procurement, to apply service-based business models, and to look also at smarter accounting rules, because it's quite odd, maybe to go a little bit into the detail, that your energy bill is an operational expenditure, so you pay per month. But if a city or a company would invest in an energy efficiency project, it has to end up on the balance sheet. And that is, in many cases, then difficult because of debt levels. And we see that many companies, even the greenest of mind, they want to use their balance sheet to do business. And so you could also say then reducing your energy bill, reducing your impacts on the environment is also then, like the energy bill, should be operational monthly expenditure.
Yeah. All right, Harry, thank you so much for your interventions there. Harry Ferhar from Signify. It leads us, that question, very nicely on to Ursula Hartenberger and the couple of guests who follow Ursula, because this is now looking very much at the building sector. Ursula is from the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction. And of course, this sector is one of the key sectors Ursula mentioned in the weight of cities. It's got really important impacts on the environment and resource consumption. Tell us more about some of the practical solutions that can increase the circularity piece of in this sector.
Yeah, thank you very much, Axel, for giving me the floor and to give me the opportunity to talk about the Global Alliance work around building passports, which is a very good example for an integrated data solution. And I'm very grateful for my predecessors, other speakers already mentioning the need for data also at city level, but obviously it starts at building level, because let's not forget that when we talk about cities, the whole fabric of cities is made up of individual buildings. And and before I do that, I'd like to just briefly talk about the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction, which I represent here. It was founded at COP21, and it's UNEP-hosted initiative, has over 150 members, covering countries, intergovernmental organizations, private sector, civil society, research, and with a common goal. And the common goal really is a commitment to a zero emission, efficient and resilient buildings and construction sector. And to put really the sector on a path towards decarbonization in alignment with the Paris goals. However, in order to actually achieve that and to successfully make the business case for all those solutions that we've been hearing about so far in this session, ranging from passive building design, nature-built solution, innovative ways of how to deal with materials, new material development, recycling, use of waste and products, and circularity, you name it. Well, sectoral practices really have to change, which is what the Alliance is there for. And one crucial component of that is a more consistent and coherent approach to building data and building data management. And there are many reasons, and I'm not going to go into them now because of the time limitations here, but many reasons why the built environment sector, is probably not quite as switched on to, data management than other sectors. One of them clearly is one of the sectoral fragmentation. But let's just say that whether it's in relation to climate change solutions, whole life cycle carbon, circularity, or sustainable finance, and we've heard a lot about finance here as well, one invariably hears from stakeholders, but there's no data. And I just like to say that simply this is not true, because building information and data is generated throughout the whole life cycle, at every stage of the life cycle, for different stakeholders, for different purposes: urban planning, design, construction, procurement, cost management, materials inventory, insurance, operation, and so forth. And so you can ask ourselves, so if the data is mostly there, what is actually the problem? Yeah. And the real problem is that at present, there's still very little integrated whole life cycle data thinking in the sector. Yeah, it's all kind of like, I was talking about the fragmentation, and you see that with data as well. So if information is available at all, that is, if it's not already been mislaid or is somewhere in the organization where nobody has access to, it's often no longer useful because it's not been lost. It's not been updated. The formats don't correspond to one another. Nobody really knows why it's been raised or what the methodology behind it actually was. So what we see, there's only very limited data and information flow from one life cycle stage to the next, and often. What little there is, only a small part will actually be carried through the whole life cycle. And I mean, you may ask, well, why does this matter? But it matters because apart from causing, a lot of intransparency, which in itself is not very good, it also, increases cost, inefficiencies, leads to heightened risks. But it also stifles innovation, all those innovations we need, in terms of actually making circularity a reality in this sector.
Okay, I'm going to have to hurry you a little bit, Ursula.
Yeah, I'm going to be very quick now. So what is a building-based passport? Essentially, it's actually a whole life cycle container of relevant building information, and it covers just everything. Yeah, from the land planning stage down to the repurposing or decommissioning. And it can actually, through this kind of whole life cycle approach, it will also foster and promote the idea of circularity. So where we are in this project, basically, we have been working with a global task force of experts for the last 2 years, and we have now developed a set of guidelines, which is going to be published very soon. And we're actually looking at the moment into piloting building passports with governments and industry representatives in order to test the feasibility of actually rolling this out. And this does not just apply to Europe, but we're taking a very global approach here.
Great. Ursula, thank you very much indeed for those thoughts. Ursula Hartenberger, Global Alliance Buildings and Construction. Paolo Falchioni is Director General at Applia and joins us now. Paolo, how can sustainable lifestyles and the commitment to resource efficiency ensure that home appliances aren't a burden on our urban environments?
Axel, thanks for the floor. It's a pleasure to be here and represent the home appliance industry in Europe. And coming to your question, products that are offered to consumers today are circular. So I'm willing actually to contribute to this current discussion on how actually cities could be more circular, how we could have lower carbon and more resource efficient cities, which are positive with respect to the natural environment, by telling that each of us can make a difference. I'll make a very simple example. Using a dishwasher to clean our dishes, it is using less than 10 liters per water. If we did all of that by hand, we would use more than 100 liters of water. Not to mention that the dishwasher is using 1/2 of the energy that we would use to warm up the water to clean our dishes. So the key point here, it is to use the technology that we have. Europe, which is thought to be a very advanced region in the world, it has an average penetration rate of dishwasher which is 45%, with countries like Romania with only 3% of penetration rate. So there is a huge gap to close from each of us in order to improve the situation as it is today. The industry, it is also contributing with innovative business models. I'll make 2 examples from Belgium, which is where the association is based. There is a project which is sponsored by one of our members with a social housing in the West Flanders, where latest technology for home appliances, it is offered to the social housing for a minimum fee per month for 10 years. So it's a kind of leasing models that are offered to social housing, where normally you would go for the lower efficient appliances. We are offering top level appliances with service and with detergent included in the renting. Another example, which is more a business to business, there is a platform that is matching, and it's called Smart Loop, the availability of waste with whoever it is making that waste as secondary raw material at all levels. So there are numerous examples. There are numerous products that are available today to improve the way in which we live sustainably in our town. And I stop it here. Thank you, Axel.
Okay, thank you, Paolo. Look, I'm going to move it on now to the next speaker. I'm sure there will be questions. I'd like to open it up to questions at the end of this segment. So, Paolo, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts. Robert Pinter, sticking with a sort of similar theme, Robert Pinter is Green and Healthy Buildings Manager for Europe, the International Copper Association. So material efficiency, urban mining, clearly important factors in achieving real circularity in the urban environment, right?
Yes, and thank you very much, and happy to be here representing International Copper Association. And yeah, as mentioned many times today, the projected growth in the urbanization, it is paramount that cities achieve better resource efficiency by a paradigm shift from a linear to circular economy, both in terms of stocks like building materials and flows, and services like water, energy, and waste, and keep the value of the materials for as long as possible in the economy, minimizing waste generation. And circularity should be the cornerstone of planning, use, and end-of-life stages of the built environment. When a building is planned, long-term decisions are made, and concept of design to last longer, preferring durable materials, is the first step in the right direction. As far as use phase is concerned, avoiding unnecessary demolitions, extending the lifetime of buildings by reuse, repair, and upgrade is also key to reduce the environmental footprint of cities. But every building and product reaches the end of its useful life. At this point, the demolition waste becomes a potential source of raw materials, and this is where urban mining fits into the circular economy as the last loop, capturing waste and returning secondary raw materials to the economy. An effective collection and recycling of construction and demolition waste minimizes landfill and leads to a more sustainable raw material circle. To achieve real circularity, the construction sector should avoid using products that have no potential value recovery and are handled as waste at the end of their functional life. From a circular perspective, we can think of buildings, as mentioned by Ursula today, as a material banks. That means assemblages of valuable materials that can be identified, separated, and transformed at the end of each use. So, policies should support design for recycling and deployment of product and material passport type digital tools to foster recovery, recycling, and reuse of materials in the built environment and ensure that the right information is easily accessible. The recovery of raw materials from the urban mine can be increased and supported by clear and strict policies and regulations, particularly by those which incentivize recycling over landfilling, with focus on durable and fully recyclable metals such as copper. And then let me underpin two other issues what we heard today. First is about the importance of efficient and renewable-based district heating in decarbonization of our cities. And here, legislative environment should support investment in infrastructure of heating networks to capture economically feasible industrial excess heat, and innovative regulations should ensure that this heat is available at prices competitive with fossil alternatives. Here we have an exemplary system in Hamburg where district heating system receives heat from a local Aurubis copper plant. A heat recovery system saves natural gas and feeds the district heating of the Hafen City East delivering primary energy savings and cutting CO2 emissions by 20,000 tons annually. Also, energy efficiency policies should be pinned on bridging the performance gap, that means overestimation of energy saving from a design-based calculated promises. Accelerating renovation rates without shifting towards operation-based energy performance standards would not only lead to missing out huge energy and CO2 savings, but also saddle cities with a building stock that is far from energy efficient.
I'm going to have to hurry you a little bit, Robert.
Yeah, last, a very optimistic view that decarbonization of our building stock in cities will require mobilization of tremendous resources. But considering that cities are at the crossroad of electricity, heating, and transport sectors, we should stop them seeing as part of an expensive problem and start considering deep energy renovations as an opportunity to cost-effectively integrate technologies into the energy system, solve multiple climate issues, and turn buildings from a problem into a solution for the climate.
Robert, thank you very much indeed. Robert Pinter from the International Copper Association. Dr. Wang Lan is the Deputy Dean of the College of Architecture and Urban Planning at Tongji University. Dr. Wang, we've just heard several different examples of different technologies. Tell us the role of urban planning and design to facilitate the adoption of these sorts of technologies. Where does this come in?
Thank you, Axel. I think it's quite important to promote urban planning and design as a platform to integrate those innovations and the new technology. As we can see now, the big data actually really changed our way to analyze the city, to understand more about the temporal and spatial behavior of local residents. And more importantly, I think the innovation of planning per se also provide more opportunity to integrate those new technology and the innovation too. For instance, at the community level, right now we are trying to promote a new concept. It's called 15 minutes living circle. And we are trying to plan a better community parks and facilities to adopt the human behavior pattern. And then within this 15 minutes walking distance, you can have better accessibility to jobs and healthy facilities and all those things. It's actually, I think, could provide better job housing balance and also decrease the energy consumption as well. And it's also a very good opportunity to bring the nature to the city as well. I think this is sort of the new tool in the planning field to support the integration of those new technology and innovations. And at the same time, in China, we are also having a new planning system. It's trying to support a better integration solution at the city level. We call it a National Land Spatial Planning System. In the past, urban planning usually focusing more on the built environment, but right now, this new plan system is trying to integrate not only the urbanized area, but also the unurbanized area, like forest, farmland, waterfront, all those things. And at this platform, you also need to build sensors to understand how we could deal with the resources, how to analyze the different kinds of effects of those elements. And then in this way, you could provide better technology to make all those spatial elements more balanced. So in summary, I would say that for policymakers at different geographic scale, community, city, provincial, county, so all those different jurisdictions. Urban planning definitely provide a policy tool to think about how we could allocate the resources and build the more livable environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wang, and just very quickly to follow up on that. So the inclusion of green space and the as we heard in Medellin and other cities today in Freetown, this has now become an integral part of your job, right, as an urban planner?
Sure, I think it's not now. In all the past, urban planning is trying to bring the nature together with the urbanized life. That's sort of the ideal situation for local residents in cities.
Okay. Dr. Wang, thank you so much for speaking with us today. Thank you. Look, the final, our final speaker in this section, before we come to the final section of today's overall session, is Sarah O'Carroll. Sarah is Cities Lead at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So in a way, we're going to sort of take a step back and look at the need, I guess, for a fundamental shift in the global approach to tackling all of these things. And we've heard a lot about innovation, infrastructure and skills and the need for investment here. Why is collaboration so critical to this, Sarah?
Collaboration is so important because no one actor, we firmly believe, can change the system alone. So we really need to encourage collaboration both between governments, within governments, and between businesses to do this systemic shift and to really accelerate the transition to a circular economy. So I was really pleased that colleagues Kwabi from ICLEI Africa and Mayor Yvonne from Freetown, as well as others, spoke about this urgency to collaborate for system change. And I thought here that I'd say that governments can be enablers and leaders in their respective areas, establishing circular economy strategies and roadmaps, investing in circular public procurement and urban management, reviewing the legislative framework to unlock regulatory barriers, and their alignment between and within the different tiers of government. So both at an international level, a national level, at local level, is critical to create an enabling framework for us to make these changes. And as I said, it's not only government that needs to collaborate. To transform the system, multiple stakeholders need to be engaged, and businesses have a key leadership role here, building collaboration across supply chains, between sectors, and with government. And then something else that I really wanted to kind of bring home today is that we need to invest in innovation, infrastructure, and skills to accelerate the circular economy. And really that's the message that I'd like to bring to the policy forum, the business science policy forum today, that we need to urgently accelerate the transition to a circular economy. And I was very pleased that Martina and Anu, as well as other colleagues, brought this up earlier. And we need to do this because solely relying on energy efficiency and switching to renewable energy will only address 55% of global greenhouse gas emissions. The remaining 45% are a direct result of the way we make and use products and food. So to achieve our climate targets, we need a fundamental shift in our global approach to tackling climate change. We need to transition to renewable energy and improve resource efficiency, as colleagues have said earlier, but we also need to rethink the way we make and use products and food, and we need to reimagine the city. And the circular economy can play a critical role in addressing the impacts of our current take, make, waste economy. The circular economy promotes a design-led approach to eliminate waste, keep products and materials in use, and regenerate natural systems. So it can be used to support the creation of low-carbon, thriving, and resilient cities, whilst also tackling many global challenges like climate change, biodiversity loss, waste, and pollution. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about investing in innovation, infrastructure, and skills to accelerate the circular economy. But I also want to say that we need to be looking at 5 other components to accelerate the transition to a circular economy. And those are stimulating design for the circular economy, managing resources to preserve their value. We need to make sure that the underlying economic conditions and incentives are aligned with delivering a circular economy. And then I've already spoken earlier about our need to collaborate together to change the system. And then coming back to this, how we can invest in innovation, infrastructure, and skills to accelerate the circular economy, both public and private investment is needed here. The public sector has a key role to play in innovation. National governments can fund research and innovation programs that tackle specific challenges and a wide range of research areas, such as production processes that can support circular assembly techniques and localized infrastructure solutions, as well as research insights into organic and non-organic materials. And city governments can establish small business incubators and accelerator programs and showcase demonstrators, help to establish demonstrators within the city that showcase the circular economy in action. When it comes to infrastructure, we need to support the circular economy with infrastructure that supports global trade. So that includes digital, transport, and renewable energy infrastructure. And we need to reimagine the city center. As many colleagues have said, bringing nature back and rethinking infrastructure in the city center. We can do that by expanding natural infrastructure, such as green spaces. Multimodal transport infrastructure is important to support reverse logistics, and digital infrastructure like Wi-Fi hotspots in the city center so that consumers can access new digital services. And when it comes to skills, it's important to incorporate the circular economy into the formal education system, into schools and higher education, but it's also important that we support the development of skills for the future. With economies developing so fast these days, it's important for governments to help support the building of learning societies and to leverage informal and participatory ways of engaging citizens. Mm-hmm. Since we're short time, I'll stop there.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to hurry you a little bit, Sarah.
I'm finished.
Oh, you're okay. Good. I'm sorry then. That was rude of me. Look, I've got a couple. The reason I wanted you to finish is that we have got a couple of questions that have come through. And before we move on to the final section, I'd quite like to throw these in. And in fact, Sarah, let's ask you this first one because it talks to a lot of what you've been talking about. Are smart cities, it's a basic question, but are smart cities the answer to our environmental problems?
They are, I think they're part of the answer. They're not the only answer. So what smart cities allow us to do is collect the data that we need to understand how the city is working. And that data can be used for decision making, but it's certainly not the only thing. If we just look to transition to smart cities, we will miss eliminating waste and pollution. We will miss making products and services or designing products and services in a way to keep products and materials in use, and we'll miss opportunities to regenerate natural systems. Yeah. So I'd say it's part of it, but it's not the whole solution.
Okay, and finally, this is also a question for you. You know, strengthening public-private partnerships, particularly in developing nations. I mean, how critical is that? How do we do it?
It's certainly critical, but I wouldn't say that we should only be thinking about public-private partnerships in terms of infrastructure building, although that's certainly critical as well. They also, we call them, I guess, like little p public-private partnerships, which are partnerships between the public and private sector around things like capacity building, communications campaigns, and things like that. That it's not only infrastructure where the public sector and private sector can collaborate together. There are lots of other opportunities.
All right, Sarah, look, thank you very much indeed for your time today. Sarah O'Carroll from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone in the technology and innovation segment of this. It was fascinating to hear all these different perspectives from the private sector. So thank you very much indeed. And we move now to the final part of this piece today, and it is a critical part, of course, and we've talked a lot about it already, the ambitious policies that will pave the way to getting this stuff done. 5 speakers, and I'll introduce them one by one, and we'll hear from them. First up is Maimouna Mod Sharif, the Executive Director at UN Habitat. Maimouna, thank you so much for joining us. We've heard about the private role of the role rather of private sector actors and technologies to achieve transition. But of course, the policy piece is critical. And we heard Sarah say just there, policymakers, governments need to be enablers. They need to be leaders as well as helping on the funding side, I would guess. Give us your thoughts first on the overall policy picture and how critical that is.
Thank you very much, Asal. Thank you very much for having me in this exciting topics. I think the COVID-19 pandemics really demonstrated that cities and city leaders hold the key to making peace with nature. I hope you agree with me. However, if we want transformational change, we need to start now. And we have talked about this, I think I listened also from the very beginning, and set even greater ambitions if we do not want to end up living in the dead cities. So I think we believe that if cities are to have a future, we will need to incorporate models of urbanization based on the circular economy. We heard about it just now. Encourage proximity production, champion shorter supply chains, adopting integrated planning. I heard about from Dr. Wang just now about integrated planning approaches for environmentally sensitive urban development. And many governments will have to implement corrective policy measures. I think COVID-19 have showed it. And incentive, such as carbon pricing, elimination of previous fossil fuel subsidies. And this cannot be achieved by cities or national government alone, as our last speaker talking about the collaboration, the private sector. I believe in the 4 Ps, public, private, people partnership in order to move forward. And they will require all for society approach, collaborative, multi-level governance for a degree that the pandemic has demonstrated be possible. In UN Habitat, Axel, we have also the pen holder of this Secretary General Policy Brief, COVID-19 in an Urban World. Remind us that long-term pandemic recovery cannot come at the price of climate inaction. Indeed, short-term that stimulus measures must and need to have green string attached. So bringing nature back to cities will be the instrumental for both climate change adaptation and mitigation. And in fact, the nature-based solution could provide 1/3 of the net reduction in greenhouse gas emission required to meet the goal of the Paris Agreement. So we are very fortunate, I think. Cities are uniquely positioned to drive this transition. So they agglomerate resources, even though it's a scarce resources, capital, we heard just now, data, talent within the shorter distances. So we need the optimal densities that make infrastructure and urban services work efficiently, while potentially reducing resources use and greenhouse gas emission. So all this can reduce the degradation of ecosystem, whose services support urban communities and often the vulnerable ones or the people living in the slum. So urban expansion here, planning again, must be managed in harmony with nature, protecting and restoring ecosystem, and ensuring an adequate supply of green open spaces and clean air. And let me give you some example. In UN Habitat, we strongly committed to adding value to a better environment, urban environment through our flagship program. So we have a flagship program called Resilient Settlement for Urban Poor and SDG cities. So this is very, very important. That will include the acceleration of technical advisory services, building a new partnership, and at the same time mobilizing new funding. So through UN Habitat, new cities investment facility. So I would like to invite the private sector here to look at our cities investment facilities. And we also have the public space program that have been working with cities in Africa and Asia. So we continue to work with UNEP in numerous programs and projects, including the building climate resilient of urban system through ecosystem-based adaptation, or EBA, in Asia Pacific region, funded by the Global Environment Facility, or GEF. So this project actually to develop proof of concept for comprehensive ecosystem-based adaptation in the least developed countries, with strong emphasis on reducing vulnerability for poor urban communities. So in doing so, UNEP and UN Habitat combine forces with environmental management and urban planning tools. So in the UN system at large, particularly within the biodiversity sphere, we are pleased with the support for building for better peri-urban regulation, planning, and management. So the GEF will continue to be a critical source of financing for this ambitious work. Closer to home in Nairobi, Excel and colleagues, we are collaborating with UNEP in the Go Blue project, funded by the European Union to ensure holistic land to sea waste management program to ensure better quality of life on land and on sea. So I agree with all of you. There is no excuse anymore not to take action now. We can live in peace with nature. So for our part, we are convening Council on Urban Initiative. It's composed of 30 experts around the world, and it will provide intellectual and scientific leadership, which in turn will invigorate programming for the future. So in this and in other initiatives, we are very much looking forward working with you. Let me finally saying this. Let's move to integrated approach of planning, policy, and land uses. Let's move from policy to practice. Let's translate our strategy to action. Let's collaborate. Start our action now to achieve SDG 11 and other SDGs through Agenda 2030. Thank you very much. Over to you, Excel. Thank you.
Thank you, Maimuna, for your thoughts and the passion and the energy as well. Some very, very important points raised there. And I want to now put one of those to His Excellency, Mr. Rodrigo Rodriguez Tornquist, the Secretary of Climate Change, Sustainable Development and Innovation in Argentina. Clearly, national government support for sustainability efforts in cities is critical, as we've heard all the way through this. Is it happening in Argentina? Can you give us some examples of this happening in Argentina?
Thank you, Axel. Thank you so much, and thanks to the Sustainable Cities Impact Program for inviting me to participate on this panel. First of all, I think we need to understand that we are in times of transformation, an incredible transformation, and at a scale and at a speed maybe unprecedented. The pandemic showed us that cities can be transformed very rapidly and in a very agile way by the power of the people, claiming for more public space, for a different lifestyle. While we are trying to think about how to promote the use of bicycles for years, the pandemic found us without any bicycle at the shops because people just went to the city. And if we look forward, we identify a very uncertain future, and we understand from the national government that innovation is the best approach to address uncertainty. Argentina is actively engaged at the highest governmental level in promoting climate action, resource efficiency, and sustainability in cities, both nationally and internationally. At the global level, we are participating in the Chen YFP and One Planet Network, the International Resource Panel, and on the Global Alliance for Buildings and Constructions, among other international forums, where the conceptual framework of cities is often discussed as a key issue for enabling wider sustainability. At a regional level, Argentina also has a strong voice in sustainable consumption and production within Latin America and the Caribbean, and plays an active role in global forums as well as in the Regional Council on Sustainable Consumption and Production for the LAC region. At the national level, the government promotes the sustainable development of cities by accompanying local governments in all stages, from planning and implementation of small projects to scaling up and sustaining the initiatives over time, in addition to strengthening local capacities, sharing good practices, and making them available to all cities in the country. We are working in a coordinated manner between the different national ministries that have interference in the sustainable development of cities, and to build a national public policy, as we understand that the approach to cities should be a comprehensive approach, which articulates green areas with protected areas, transport systems, especially public transport and active mobility, nature tourism, public works, waste treatment, peri-urban and agroecological production, among others. It should be addressed in a comprehensive manner. As an example of what we are doing, we are working with a sustainable cities project funded by the GEF, the Global Environmental Facility. And once it is approved, hopefully next April, we will start working with pilot projects in 5 cities of the country, promoting protected areas, promoting sustainable tourism, promoting a new and innovative use and design of public space, and also promoting the agriculture, urban agriculture, as a manner to sustain the need for better and organic food. Also, something that we need to highlight is the increase on the demand from the citizens on healthy food. You know, many people are composting at their homes, are starting having their own to grow their own food at home, and that is a very good opportunity. And we understand that we need to boost that, to catalyze that movement of citizens trying to have a better way to live in city. That is a very powerful force that we need to channel and to promote and to increase velocity and the scale of this transformational change. So thanks for your time. I know that we are short of time, and we remain available for your inquiries. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rodrigo. Appreciate it. Well, look, let's throw it straight to Abdallah Moqsit, who's from the IPCC. You know, you've heard, Abdallah, I hope, a number of guests today talking about the need for support from the middle, the need from support from government, for the need support from business. I mean, and we've all heard the IPCC's warnings and advice to governments, etc., etc. What do cities need to do if we want to achieve the Paris goals?
Okay, thank you very much, Axel. And I want just to start by taking the opportunity to thank you, Axel, because now I was attending all this for business forum from the beginning, and you became familiar. I want also to thank all of the UNEP from the executive director, Mrs. Inger, and also the excellent team behind this forum, Jian Liu, Shirin Zorba, Rihana, and others. So this is excellent, initiative. And exactly, I think my answer here is about the role of IPCC as a sort of a good interface. I think for me, the IPCC, which is the child of two parent organization, UNEP, and also the World Meteorological Organization. IPCC is for me the best interface between science and policy, but it was not complete. With the business forum, science business forum, you have this triptych that can provide the good information. And I want to answer directly to your question, because during the international conference of cities held in Edmonton by IPCC, it was clear that I think there are many aspects related to the climate change and the cities governor to deal with if they want to achieve a good plan. Now, the fact that we are helped during this sixth cycle. I think we are now in sixth cycle of IPCC, where we are focusing more on solution. And solution, when we are speaking about solution, that means we should deal with scale dimension as well as sectoral dimension. But cities are like a laboratory for this combination. I think this is the best laboratory to test, for me, three concepts. And this is because now we advanced a lot in science, but toward the solution, we have to deal with three concepts. The first concept is the knowledge risk management, not only risk management, now not only crisis management. And this is offered through this forum and through this IPCC and all the work, the report we are producing. The second concept is the concept of this multi-dimensional vigilance. And in cities, and this is what was raised by the governors, all the governors of cities are becoming now very vigilant, but the vigilance is multi-dimensional now. It is about security, about climate change, about hunger, about everything, flooding, all this extreme event. And that means if you want to be vigilant, you should behave like a commando, a technical commando, a scientific commando, and also a policy commando, and also a business commando. And the third concept that should be really, for me, it can be good deliverable of this forum, is that we should migrate from this business model or business plan to science policy business model, or science policy business plan. And this is because any dimension, any plan should be looked through these three dimensions. And with this, we will incorporate all the information that we have, and it should be really presented to policy maker, the decision maker, in the way that the information is easy to be incorporated to any plan. Now for this sixth cycle for IPCC, I am happy to say that we faced also this COVID situation, and we succeeded to have forever, I think, and it was a sort of good demonstration to have the first plenary in virtual, and it went well. And now also with many meetings. But what I want to say exactly here, the past report of IPCC, special report, demonstrate already how it is serious, situation is serious in the world about climate change. And mainly, as I said, in the laboratory of cities. If you want to measure, if you want to have a level, a cursor of climate change, go to the cities. And this is eloquent. Now, what is coming from IPCC in the rest of this cycle? I think we are going to conclude this cycle by 2022, when we will provide the rest of our report. We will conclude by synthesis report, but I want to inform already all the participants that we included, and this is because this cycle is solution oriented. This cycle is option oriented. We included many chapters dealing with cities, with finance, with scale related to cities, governance related to cities, uncertainties related to decision maker in cities, and all these chapters are about to be prepared and to be approved in next year. Yes. This is something that can really help all the decision maker from any discipline, any expert, and I am taking this opportunity to invite all of you, all the participants, to contribute to this review process, because as you know, IPCC reports are, above all, are reports that should be approved by government. And it is this is what I said, it is a sort of good interface between science and the policy. Now with the forum, it is exactly the complete picture. I can conclude with 3C. 1C about convergence, and through the forum, we feel how we cannot achieve any deliverable, good one, useful one, as toolbox. and a science business policy toolbox without having convergence. We cannot have achieve something which is useful for the well-being if you are not managing everything by complementarity. And also, we cannot achieve anything if there is no best coordination at all the level. Thank you very much. And once again, thank you, because I be familiar with you as family, my brother.
Thank you so much. It's nice to hear that. Abdallah Moqsid from the IPCC, thank you for your thoughts. Santiago Saura is the City Councillor for International Affairs and Cooperation of Madrid in Spain. Of course, Santiago, we've heard a number of times today about forests in urban areas, and I know that's something that Madrid is also working hard and has demonstrated strong leadership in bringing back nature into the city. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. Thank you for inviting us to participate in this session. As it has just been said, cities are key for climate neutrality, which cannot happen without the cities. And you may know that the European Union target was to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2030 compared to 1990 levels. But this ambition has been increased recently to at least 55% reduction in the recent proposal from the European Commission. In Madrid, in this context, we are finalizing a renewed, updated city strategy for the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, with an increasing ambition, in which, among other city targets in SDG 13, we include the objective of decreasing by at least 60% greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, which is an even more ambitious target than the recently updated European target I just mentioned. How are we going to do this? Because this is certainly not an easy task. And the Madrid City Council cannot do it alone, and we cannot just rely on business as usual or on small incremental changes. We need transformative change, and we need innovation. For this reason, in Madrid, we are working for more than 1 year now as one of the 15 European demonstration cities of Climate Kick, specifically in the deep demonstration of clean and healthy cities funded by Climate Kick. You may know that Climate Kick is the knowledge and innovation community on climate action supported by the European Union through the European Institute of Innovation and Technology. It is the largest European initiative on innovation for climate action. In this Madrid demonstration, a city deep demonstration, we are bringing together multiple partners from the city together with Climate Kick, multiple departments from the Madrid City Council, the academia, universities, private companies, social actors, and we work in a multi-actor engagement process to co-create and co-design innovation that can accelerate climate action plans in the city. Our work in this deep demonstration includes the development of a business case of the decarbonization of Madrid, supported by Material Economics, which is one of the partners of Climate Kick. In this business case, we analyze different decarbonization levers in the city and analyze the costs as well as the benefits of each of these levers, considering direct economic benefits, for example, energy savings, but also other benefits such as job creation or health benefits. This analysis is showing that most of the decarbonization levers have a positive or net economic outcome for the city. In fact, the decarbonization target of Madrid to 2030 has a return of investment above 30%, according to this analysis. This return of investment will be effectively positive mostly in the decade from 2030 to 2040. From now to 2030, we need investments, we need spendings in decarbonization that are higher than the return in economic benefits considered only the period up to 2030. So what can we do? We are doing, and we will make an effort with the municipal budget, but now we have an excellent opportunity to accelerate these required investments and decarbonization with the Next Generation EU, the 750 billion euro recovery instrument for the European Union, which has a strong emphasis on sustainability and on boosting the green transition in accordance with the European Green Deal. We expect that some of these funds will significantly support some of the projects in the portfolio of projects on climate change mitigation and adaptation that we have in the city of Madrid, in partnership with other administrations, private companies, public-private partnerships, and international initiatives like Climate Kick, as I just said. To conclude, let me mention one specific project of Madrid that relates very well to your question and to the title of this overall session, Bringing Nature to the Urban Environment. And this is a project that is mainly related to adaptation to climate change, because we want Madrid will grow, the city will grow, but we want also nature to grow in Madrid, within and around the city. And the project we have is a large-scale green infrastructure project, the Metropolitan Forest, which is a 75-kilometer-long ecological and social corridor composed of native species only that will surround the entire city of Madrid. And it will be developed over the next 10 years, but it has already started. This project will increase the availability of high-quality open space for citizens in close proximity to their houses, which is also a relevant response given the pandemic context. It will connect in a single continuous belt several green areas that are now, let's say, scattered and isolated from each other around the city. And it will include green bridges or ecoducts above some of the main roads or highways that come into the city, so to avoid the fragmentation and isolation of urban habitats, and in this way promote urban biodiversity close to the city or within the city. The Metropolitan Forest will be also linked to other larger scale regional green infrastructure projects, such as the Arco Verde in Spanish, is a green belt at the regional level, and to ecological connections with protected areas at this regional level beyond, let's say, the 600 square kilometers of the municipality of Madrid itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Santiago Saura. Fascinating, and we look forward to see the development of it was Metropolitano, I think is how you'd say it in Spanish. Thank you so much. And to our final speaker of the day, Oliver Oliver Hillel, Program Officer, the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity. Oliver is speaking on behalf of the Executive Secretary, Elizabeth Riemann. Oliver, clearly 2021 is a crucial year on the biodiversity calendar. Tell us what you think needs to happen to preserve our ecosystems and biodiversity, and what roles cities need to play in this.
Thank you so much, Axel, and what a great panel. Thank you also for your work, really untiring, getting all the highlights, and I think we can start with what you just said. I think maybe the first of 5 points on behalf of Elizabeth Rema of the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity is to say that we don't need to start from scratch. We have heard over the last 3 hours a lot of the great examples that are being done. We have already in the convention itself for the last 10 years have a plan of action specifically for the engagement of subnational and local governments with the national governments that are signatories to the convention. So we will see now, not only at UNEA is there a summit of cities, but at the upcoming conference of the parties in China at the end of this year, we will see the 7th summit of subnational governments and cities. So we're seeing this cooperation happening more and more. And this is, of course, very much necessary because just China and India, as we know, will have to urbanize something like 300 million people over the next 10 years. And we've heard that is about a Paris a week. The second, the second point is we know what to do. And one of the targets of the global biodiversity framework that the convention is currently negotiating actually says that every one of the countries that signs on to the convention will make sure that the benefits of nature are taken to urban dwellers. It's the target 11. So in order to do that, we know that we have to create a new kind of city. We need to first change the very texture of cities. You know, we need to change the way concrete and the infrastructure is built with nature. We already know about sponge cities, but we want rainforest cities. We want sponge, you know, all kinds of savanna cities. We want all kinds of coral reef cities. So every city needs to become a garden in a city, and we know there are so many examples of that in Singapore, Medellin, and Tianjin in China, so many examples. But the second component of that is the urban-rural connections, the teleconnections. I want to highlight the Dasgupta report that came out, talks about telecouplings, the implications of urban infrastructure to, you know, ecosystems, hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of miles away. So there are teleconnections that we absolutely need to use, and maybe that's one of the most actionable elements, those urban-rural linkages that we've also worked out with UN Habitat. You know, those might be one of the most important things to look ahead. And there's a process for that. I want to welcome the so-called Edinburgh process for the consultation and the engagement of subnational local governments in the work of the convention. It's been going on. It has produced a new proposal for a plan of action for the next 10 years. So we're going to see in the convention a lot of very exciting work as we go around on how these three levels or more of government can work together. Last 2 points. One is we already know where we want to go. You know, I like this image of Alice in Wonderland where the cat asks Alice, she is lost and she's walking around and the cat asked her, where do you want to go? And she said, well, actually, I don't care. And then she said, well, in that case, any direction is good. And it's not the case here. We know where we need to go. We need to create jobs for young people in cities. We need to create the new economy inside of the big urban conglomerates. I'm from Sao Paulo. The big extended metropolitan area of Sao Paulo is 36 million of the most consume-intensive people in the whole area of the Mercosur. So we need to take advantage and unleash that power so that it generates green jobs. This is the direction we want to go. We're not lost. And finally, I just want to recognize how many of those programs already exist. We heard the new head of the GEF, and we know that GEF 6 and 7 had wonderful investments. We hope that there will be a significant one. But there's also the Green Climate Fund coming into cities. There is IKI expanding its Interact Bio project. There's so many new, the World Bank has a network of it. The Inter-American Development Bank is involving and investing in new cities. So I really welcome UNEP and UNDP leading here. And thank you once again, Axel, for the opportunity on behalf of the CBD Secretariat. Thank you so much.
A pleasure, Oliver, and thank you very much indeed for speaking with us today as our final speaker. There's so many questions I'd like to ask, but we are so tight on time, and I know we have a few interventions, and I do have to get to those now, Oliver. But thank you very much indeed. All right, look, I've got 3 interventions, and I do need to stress to each one we need a minute or less from you, so 60 seconds. It's quite a lot of time in TV terms, so that is your challenge. And then I'm going to hand it back to Martina after that. First up is Jack McQuibben from the NGO's Major Group and Stakeholders. Jack, over to you.
Thank you very much, Axel. So my name is Jack McQuibben, the Zero Waste Cities Programme Coordinator at Zero Waste Europe, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Zero Waste Europe coordinates the Zero Waste Cities programme, consisting of nearly 400 European municipalities who've committed to and are implementing local zero waste strategies. The Zero Waste Cities model is a ready-made, proven framework to bring about transformative and sustainable change that have been discussed throughout this session. Firstly, as the name suggests, zero waste strategies are helping European cities to reduce their waste and produce some of the best recycling results in the world. Furthermore, zero waste cities, though, they go much beyond recycling. These local authorities prioritize waste prevention and implement circular solutions that embed the needs of the local community within them. Social enterprises help create local sustainable jobs and build a thriving local community, all whilst the city saves money through having less waste to manage and higher recyclables and materials to sell on. Finally, the data that we have from Europe shows that our zero waste cities are simultaneously taking impactful steps towards reducing their greenhouse gas emissions, not only through having less waste to deal with and treat, but also simply through having less resources that are being consumed by its citizens. The zero waste cities approach is proven to work in a range of contexts, various different population sizes, from urban metropolises like in Barcelona to rural small municipalities in Romania.
Mm-hmm.
Zero waste cities are living examples of how urban populations can redesign their relationship with nature and resources. Proven to work in a range of different contexts, the policies and framework for a zero waste city are all available and ready to use. What we just need today is the political leadership to make that first step.
All right.
Thank you very much for this quick intervention and for the fruitful discussions beforehand.
A pleasure, Jack McQuibben. Many thanks for your thoughts. Number 2 is John Leo Algo, Children and Youth Major Group, and number 3 is also Children and Youth Major Group. But John Leo Algo, let's go with you.
Thank you, Axel. Good day to all of you. My name is John Leo Algo from the Philippines, representing UNEP's major group of children and youth. So for my intervention, I'd like to emphasize that cities are becoming more expansive than dense, especially observed in many small and medium-sized urban areas, which exerts immense pressure on the environment. The implementation of nature-based solutions should be prioritized. Cities should adopt the recently released IUCN Global Standard for Nature-Based Solutions, which provides a framework for defining and assessing progress for the implementation of blue, green, and/or hybrid infrastructure solutions, especially in cities in the Global South. Other critical areas for investment in cities include those with co-benefits towards attaining the SDGs and decarbonization, such as the use of engineered timber for buildings, inclusive mobility and transport, energy conservation efficiency, and projects aligned with the circular economy, as has been previously discussed. Investments in financial flows towards these solutions must also be significantly enhanced in the next decade. For instance, development banks should provide support in mobilizing resources through backing PPP pilot projects, structured pool initiatives, and other financial vehicles that provide attractive risk-return profiles for many investors. This decade has been termed as the decade of action. So in terms of rethinking cities and bringing nature into the urban environment, it is time for us to translate words into action. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. And the final intervention comes from Kerry Mulea, also Children and Youth Major Group. Kerry, over to you.
Thank you, Axel. My name is Karen Mulea, and I am an environmental and women's rights activist from South Africa. As a developing world, we look to the United Nations as a source of motivation to help us build better structures, physical and institutional. We have the following points to present. If our aim is to redesign structures, we must start by urging investors to pull back on investing in carbon-free energies, not coal mines. Secondly, the integration of science, nature, and technology, along with the enhancement of technology in Africa, will play a big part in bettering infrastructures, especially as the fourth industrial revolution approaches us. It is important that the developing world is well prepared during this reskilling emergency. Third, I would urge the inclusion of youth and women in all sectors. Women are the driving forces of communities, and the youth are the global leaders of tomorrow. Lastly, there's a common phrase in isiZulu, a South African language, which is chanted by South Africans, signifying a mark of a new era, amandla ngawethu, meaning the power is ours. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Kerry Mulea. Thank you to all of you for your interventions. Look, that wraps it up for the speakers. I'm going to throw it back to Martina in just a second. I mean, it's been, a really, really fruitful discussion from my side. Just to run through those different little parts again. We started, of course, with the theme of bringing nature back to cities and the gains from that. We went on to integrated urban solutions and alleviating the weight of cities. And of course, we then got to the policies that need to pave the way and how ambitious those policies need to be. A real host of voices there. I've very much enjoyed it. We've got a big day tomorrow for the final session, the closing session. So please make sure you join us for that as well. I'm going to throw it now back to Martina Otto. Go ahead, Martina.
Thank you, Axel. I tried with the camera, but it didn't work. But now I think it does. Okay, here I am. Thank you so much, not only to you for having taken us through these 3 intense hours, but to everybody on this fantastic panel. Thank you so much. And I won't try to summarize it all, but a few key takeaways. And I have 3 overarching ones. And the first is cities are at the front line of impact and response, both in terms of the pandemic, but also major environmental crises. And COVID-19 has highlighted even more the need for more livable and green cities. We've heard very clearly that COVID recovery must have green strings attached. And we need to rethink cities. It's an opportunity not to be missed because there is a big risk that business as usual and the reduction of budgets making us fall back. And we can't do this on the back of some of the other pressing challenges. On the contrary, we need to lock in some of the overnight changes that have been made. The second is commitments are made and actions are underway, but we need scale and pace to be increased, and that's where the policies come in. And then the third is that the cities are at the forefront, but they cannot do it alone. And what we need is an all-of-government and an all-of-society approach, and particularly as well co-creation with the private sector. And if you let me unpack that a little bit, because we're at the Science Policy and Business Forum, the science is clear. We need to take action now. We heard that from the GEO, we heard that with the pathways, we heard that from the IPCC, but we heard it as well from the weight of cities, that dealing with issues in an integrated manner is actually what we need, and it will get us places. And we heard a huge emphasis on compact urban planning and design to make sure that we can deliver those services that need to get to people with the least resource footprint. We heard about the sector optimization with 7 key sectors, and we heard more examples from the private sector on some of them. We heard the importance of cross-sector symbiosis, the opportunity for circularity, and we heard the importance of sustainable behaviors as well. What came across everything is this integration across sectors, across jurisdictions, and the integration of outcomes for multiple benefits. On the technology side, it's pretty clear, they're there. We know what to do. Some are low tech, some are high tech, some are quick fixes, some need deeper structural changes, but the private sector tells us very much that they're there, they're ready, at least the champions are. What we need is the policy, effective governance to help us get this into place. And there have been different organizations gathered here today to help as well with the capacity support to spur this radical collaboration. We heard finance is a challenge for everybody. And COVID obviously has led as well to some reduction of city budgets, and that's a real risk. But there is an opportunity for new business models, for public-private partnerships. We heard about the servitization of key services in the urban space that may actually provide a really good and interesting business model to do things differently. And we heard also a call for more direct access to national and international funding for cities, and GEF7 already is leading the way, in a sense, with the Sustainable Cities Impact Program. We heard about the power of learning from each other, so the peer-to-peer exchanges, just as the way it happened today. And I'm pretty much through. 2 more things. A quick feedback on some things on the nature side. And clearly nature plays a key role in cities. There's a true One Health approach, cities for people, nature in cities for people and the planet, nature-based solutions connecting nature, climate, and health. And as Maimuna said it's about making peace with nature. We heard a lot about the how-to harness those economic benefits, the jobs, but also the beautification of spaces, pulling in other sectors such as the urban farming was mentioned by several, but also a real possibility for gender and inclusion of disfavored society groups. And the key is buy-in. We heard that very clearly as well. We heard vibrant examples from everywhere, from Africa with Freetown, from Latin America with Medellin, from Asia, from Beijing, Europe with Madrid. And again, I mean, there's the sharing of experience. There's ICLEI, Cities with Nature, which is part of the decade for ecosystem restoration. And I think we will do much more of this. But it's also about ensuring that the cities are at the table at national and international level to express their needs and contribute to the efforts. And we heard from the CBD, they're paving the way with the City Summit and the Edinburgh process. So I think that's super interesting to keep in mind. No worries, I won't go into detail on the technology side. There was so much, but I want to highlight this encouragement of urban experimentation. I think that was pretty powerful, with the multiple reference to the neighborhood approach, the 15-minute city, and so on. The amazing panel that we had from the private sector that really made sure that we connected their sector with a broader range. So be it with the electric vehicles and the infrastructure, the charging infrastructure, be it the buildings linked to, for example, the use of excess heat with the district energy work, the reference to the bundling of solutions between renewables, energy efficiency, and green spaces and green roofs to actually make sure that the return on investment is good, and the need for underlying data for decision-making, integrated life cycle data, and a data platform to go with this. And what I took away, and I will use Martin's sentence, and that's, good ideas are hard to kill. So let us make sure all together that we factor in all these multiple benefits and make the business case for bringing back nature in cities and the integrated solutions to make them just the best idea, not to be killed. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Martina. I am coming back for 10 seconds just to say thank you once again to everyone for joining us today, to all of our speakers and to all of you who've been watching, and to your questions and interventions. Tomorrow's close is from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. Nairobi time. What is that? 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. Central European time. A really, really good lineup, a really strong lineup of speakers, high-level speakers for that. So please do join us if you can. Many thanks from me. We'll see you soon.